Dark screen fades to a stormy night in London, rain lashing against cobblestones. A ticking clock echoes, building tension. A gloved hand slides a cream-colored envelope under Hercule Poirot's door, marked with a quill watermark close up on Poirot's piercing green eyes as he opens it, his mustache twitching. Chapter 1. The enigmatic letter. Rain fell in a persistent drizzle over London, cloaking the city in a silver haze that softened the edges of its ancient stone and modern glass. Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever in his tailored overcoat and polished shoes, stood beneath the awning of his favorite patisserie on Baker Street, a cup of steaming hot chocolate cradled in his gloved hands. The aroma of cocoa mingled with the damp air, a small comfort against the chill that crept through the seams of his otherwise impeccable attire. His mustache, perfectly symmetrical, twitched slightly as he observed the bustling street, where umbrellas bobbed like black mushrooms in the downpour. Poirot's mind, however, was not on the weather or the passers-by hurrying to their destinations. It was fixed, as it so often was, on the intricate workings of the human puzzle. For 3 days, he had been without a case, a state that left him restless, his little gray cells itching for a challenge. Captain Hastings, his loyal friend, had suggested a holiday to the seaside, but Poirot had dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand. The sea, Hastings, it is too vast, too untidy. Nong, I require order, precision, a mystery to unravel. As, if in answer to his unspoken wish, the post had arrived that morning with an envelope that stood out from the usual bills and invitations. It was addressed to Monsieur Hercule Poirot, detective extraordinaire, in an elegant, looping script that suggested both education and intent. The paper was thick, cream-colored, with a faint watermark of a quill and ink-potted detail that intrigued Poirot immediately. Inside, the letter was brief but tantalizing. Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you, a beacon of intellect in a world of shadows. In the quiet village of Ashfield, Devon, lies a treasure hidden within the unpublished papers of the late Agatha Christie. It is a secret she guarded with care, a puzzle woven into her words, waiting for a mind such as yours to unravel. Seek the archive, but tread lightly, the truth is coveted by many. A clue awaits you there, should you dare to follow. Yours in mystery, a friend, no signature, no return address, only the postmark of Torquay, Devon, dated 2 days prior. Poirot had read the letter thrice, each time with growing fascination. Agatha Christie, the queen of mystery, whose novels he admired for their cunning plots and psychological depth, had left behind a secret. It was irresistible. The mention of a treasure piqued his curiosity, but it was the challenge, the implication that only he could solve it, that stirred his soul. Now, as he sipped his hot chocolate, Poirot considered his next move. Ashfield, he knew, was the childhood home of Agatha Christie, and Torquay was nearby. The archive mentioned in the letter could only refer to the private collection of her papers, housed in a discreet manner turned repository just outside the village. It was not open to the public, guarded by a trust that protected Christie's legacy with almost fanatical devotion. Gaining access would be no small feat, but Poirot was not a man to be deterred by locked doors or bureaucratic gatekeepers. He set down his cup, paid the patisserie owner with a precise nod, and stepped into the drizzle, hailing a taxi with the flourish of his cane. To Paddington Station, s'il vous plaît, he instructed the driver, his voice crisp with purpose. The journey to Devon would take a few hours, time enough to ponder the letter's implications. Who was this friend? Why now, decades after Christie's death, had this secret surfaced? And what manner of treasure could be hidden in words, not gold? The train to Torquay was a study in contrasts, the modern bustle of passengers with their briefcases and earphones, juxtaposed against the timeless rhythm of the rails. Poirot, seated in a first-class carriage, occupied a window seat, his reflection staring back at him in the rain-streaked glass. He drew the letter from his pocket, smoothing it against the table, and examined it anew. The handwriting was feminine, he decided, but deliberately formal, as if to obscure personal traits. The choice of words, beacon of intellect, tread lightly, suggested a mind both poetic and cautious. This was no idle prank. It was a calculated invitation. As the train rolled through the sodden countryside, Poirot's thoughts turned to Agatha Christie herself. He had read her novels with admiration, appreciating the way she wove deception into truth, making the reader question every motive. Could she have crafted a real-life mystery? A final denouement hidden in her papers. The idea was as thrilling as it was daunting. Poirot's fingers tapped a rhythm on his knee, a habit when his mind was at work. He would need to be meticulous, for if the letter was truthful, others might already be on the trail. Upon arriving in Torquay, Poirot took a taxi to the village of Ashfield, a quaint cluster of stone cottages and winding lanes nestled against the Devon cliffs. The rain had lessened to a fine mist, and the air carried the tang of salt from the nearby sea. The archive, known as Greenway House, stood at the edge of the village, a Georgian manor surrounded by overgrown gardens and iron gates. Its reputation as a fortress of literary history was well earned. Few were granted entry, and those who were spoke of its labyrinth in rooms filled with manuscripts, letters, and artifacts from Christie's life. At the gate, Poirot was met by a stern-faced guard, a burly man with a clipboard and a skeptical squint. "Name and purpose?" he demanded, his Devon accent thick as clotted cream. "Hercule Poirot, detective," Poirot replied, producing a card with a flourish. "I am here to consult the Christie archive on a matter of literary significance." The guard's eyes narrowed. "No appointment, no entry, trusts rules." Poirot smiled, his green eyes gleaming with charm. "Mon ami, I understand the need for rules, but surely an exception can be made for a man who seeks only to honor Madame Christie's legacy. Perhaps you might consult with the curator, Mademoiselle Harper. I am certain she would find my visit illuminating." The guard hesitated, then spoke into a radio. After a tense minute, the gate creaked open, and Poirot was escorted to the manor's entrance, where a woman awaited him. Miss Evelyn Harper, the curator, was in her late 50s, with sharp gray eyes and a posture that suggested both authority and wariness. Her navy dress was as severe as her expression, and her hair was pulled into a tight bun, not a strand out of place. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice cool but polite, "your reputation precedes you, but I must confess, your visit is unexpected. What brings you to Greenway?" Poirot bowed slightly, his hat in hand. "Mademoiselle, I am drawn by a whisper of mystery, a suggestion that within these walls lies a secret left by Madame Christie herself. I seek only to explore her papers, to understand her genius more deeply." Miss Harper's lips twitched, as if suppressing a smile or a frown. "The archive is not a lending library, monsieur. Our collection is private, and access is strictly controlled." "What precisely do you hope to find?" Poirot's mustache quivered with the hint of a smile. "That, mademoiselle, is the question. Non, I will know when I see it. But rest assured, my intentions are purely scholarly. A mind such as mine seeks only the truth, however hidden." Her eyes studied him, weighing his words. At last, she nodded. "Very well, you may have 1 hour in the reading room, under supervision. But I warn you, Monsieur Poirot, our collection is vast, and many have sought secrets here only to find dust." She led him through the manor's oak-paneled halls, past portraits of Christie and shelves groaning under the weight of books. The reading room was a high-ceilinged chamber, its walls lined with glass cases containing manuscripts, notebooks, and typed drafts. A single table stood in the center, illuminated by a green-shaded lamp. Miss Harper gestured to a chair. "You may examine the catalogued items. Nothing leaves this room." Poirot seated himself, his movements deliberate. "Merci, mademoiselle. I shall be most careful." As Miss Harper retreated to a desk in the corner, Poirot began his work. The catalogue was a thick tome, listing thousands of documents, letters, drafts, even shopping lists penned by Christie. He scanned the entries, his fingers pausing at a reference to an untitled manuscript. 1947. Miscellaneous notes. Something about the date tugged at his memory. 1947 was a year of transition for Christie, a time when she was experimenting with new forms. He requested the document, and a young assistant, a nervous girl with ink-stained fingers, brought it to him in a protective sleeve. The manuscript was a curiosity, a series of handwritten pages, the ink faded but legible, filled with disjointed notes rather than a cohesive story. Poirot's eyes darted over the text, searching for patterns. Most of it was mundane character sketches, plot ideas, but one page stood out. Tucked between two sheets of plot outlines was a single leaf, written in a different hand, not Christie's. The script matched the letter he'd received. Elegant and precise, it read, "To find the treasure, seek the heart of the tale. The quill points north, but the ink flows west. Trust not the obvious, for the truth lies in shadow." Poirot's pulse quickened. This was no coincidence. The note was a clue, deliberately placed for someone to find, but who had placed it, and when. The reference to a quill and ink echoed the watermark on the letter, suggesting a connection. He glanced at Miss Harper, who was watching him with the intensity of a hawk. Did she know of the note, or was she, too, part of the puzzle? He slipped the note back into the manuscript, committing its words to memory. To copy it would draw attention, and Poirot sensed that discretion was his ally. Instead, he turned to the assistant, who hovered nearby. "Mademoiselle, this manuscript, it is most intriguing. Tell me, are there other such anomalies in the collection, pages that do not belong?" The girl, whose name tag read Clara, blinked nervously. "I don't know, sir. I just file what I'm told. Miss Harper would know more." Poirot nodded, his smile reassuring. Of course, you are most helpful." He returned the manuscript to her, noting the way her hands trembled as she took it. Fear, or guilt. He would need to observe her further. As his allotted hour drew to a close, Poirot stood, adjusting his coat. "Mademoiselle Harper, your archive is a treasure in itself. I shall return, with your permission, to continue my study." She rose, her expression unreadable. "We'll see, Monsieur Poirot. The trust is particular about repeat visitors. Send a formal request, and we'll consider it." Outside, the mist had thickened, shrouding the manor in a veil of gray. Poirot walked to the village inn where he had booked a room, his mind racing. The note was the first thread in a tapestry of mystery, but it raised more questions than answers. Who had placed it in the manuscript? Was it recent, or had it lain undiscovered for decades? And what was this treasure, hidden in the heart of a tale? At the inn, a cozy establishment called the Quill and Ink, Poirot settled into an armchair by the fire, a glass of tisane in hand. The innkeeper, a jovial man named Mr. Tuttle, regaled him with local gossip, but Poirot's thoughts were elsewhere. The note's cryptic words quill, ink, north, west suggested a code, perhaps tied to the archive's layout or Christie's own works. He would need to return, to dig deeper, but he sensed that Greenway House held more than manuscripts. It held secrets, and perhaps danger. As he sipped his tisane, Poirot's eyes fell on a photograph above the mantel. Agatha Christie, smiling faintly, a quill pen in her hand. Her gaze seemed to meet his, as if daring him to follow the trail she had left. He raised his glass in a silent toast. "To you, Madame Christie," he murmured. "Your puzzle is accepted." The chapter closed with Poirot retiring to his room, the letter and note tucked safely in his suitcase. Tomorrow he would return to Greenway, armed with his intellect and a growing suspicion that the treasure was more than literary. It was a challenge to his very soul. Chapter 2. The locked study. Hercule Poirot adjusted his immaculate tie, the silk whispering against his starched collar as he stood before the heavy oak door of the Christie archive in Devon. The morning light filtered through a high window, casting A lattice of shadows across the stone floor of the archive's entrance hall. The air carried the musty scent of old paper and leather, a perfume that Poirot found both comforting and invigorating. His small, precise steps echoed softly as he approached the door marked private study, the one place in this labyrinth of literary relics that promised answers to the enigmatic letter he had received. The letter, penned in an elegant script that seemed to dance across the page, had arrived at his London flat 2 days prior. Its words were few but potent. Monsieur Poirot, your little gray cells are renowned. A treasure lies hidden within Agatha Christie's unpublished manuscripts, locked away in her Devon archive. Seek it, if you dare, and unravel a secret that could rewrite literary history. No signature, no return address, only a challenge that piqued his insatiable curiosity. Now, standing before the locked study, Poirot felt the familiar thrill of a mystery unfolding. The archive's curator, Miss Evelyn Harper, hovered nearby, her spectacles glinting with the nervousness that did not escape Poirot's keen observation. She was a woman of middle years, her brown hair pulled into a severe bun, her hands clasped tightly as if guarding a secret. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice clipped, "this room is rarely opened. It was Dame Agatha's private study, you understand, and we preserve it exactly as she left it." "Oui, Mademoiselle Harper, I comprehend perfectly," Poirot replied, his tone as smooth as polished marble. "But it is precisely this room that calls to me. The letter I received it suggests that something of great import awaits within. I must see it for myself." Miss Harper's lips pressed into a thin line, but she produced a heavy iron key from her pocket. "Very well," she said, "but I must accompany you. The contents of this room are delicate." "Not a Romong," Poirot agreed, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of amusement and determination. "I would not dream of disturbing such sanctity without your guidance." The key turned with a groan, and the door swung inward, revealing a small, dimly lit chamber that seemed frozen in time. A sturdy mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with an inkstand, a blotter, and a scattering of yellowed papers. Shelves lined the walls, groaning under the weight of books and manuscripts, their spines cracked and faded. A single window, draped in heavy velvet, allowed a sliver of daylight to pierce the gloom, illuminating motes of dust that danced like tiny stars. Poirot stepped inside, his patent leather shoes silent on the worn rug. He inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of old ink and secrets. "This," he murmured, "is where the mind of Madame Christie wove her tales of intrigue." A most sacred space, indeed. Miss Harper lingered by the door, her posture rigid. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, be careful. These items are irreplaceable." "Fear not, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his mustache twitching with a faint smile. "I am the soul of discretion." He began his examination with the desk, his gloved fingers tracing the carved edges as if they might whisper their secrets. The surface was orderly, almost perfect, as if someone had curated it for posterity. A fountain pen lay at a precise angle, its nib stained with ink long dried. A stack of letters, tied with a faded ribbon, sat beside a brass paperweight, shaped like a lion's head. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he noticed a faint irregularity in the desk's surface, a seam, almost invisible, running along the edge of a drawer. Double quotes, "Curieux," he muttered, pressing gently. A soft click rewarded his effort, and a shallow compartment sprang open, revealing a small, leather-bound notebook. Its cover was embossed with a simple monogram. "A.C.M.I.S.'s Harper gasped, stepping forward. "What is that? I've never seen it before." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps, mademoiselle, it is something Madame Christie wished to keep hidden, even from her most trusted curator." He opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with Christie's distinctive handwriting, though the text was not in her usual narrative style. Instead, it was a series of cryptic phrases, written in a code that seemed to blend letters and symbols in a maddeningly complex pattern. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he scanned the first page. To find the golden key, seek the scribe's shadow. The quill's truth lies where the light bends. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered, his fingers tightening on the notebook. A puzzle within a puzzle. This is no ordinary journal. Miss Harper peered over his shoulder, her breath catching. Is it some kind of code? Precisement, Poirot said, his voice alive with excitement, and one that demands the full attention of Hercule Poirot's little gray cells. He spent the next hour poring over the notebook, his mind racing as he tested patterns and substitutions. The code was intricate, requiring both linguistic finesse and a deep understanding of Christie's penchant for misdirection. At last, he deciphered a single passage, its meaning both tantalizing and obscure. The golden key unlocks the heart of the tale. The scribe holds the quill, but the shadow guards the truth. Seek the light in the hollowed flame. Poirot closed the notebook, his mind alight with possibilities. The golden key, he mused, and this scribe, a person, perhaps, or a metaphor for Madame Christie herself. Miss Harper shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to the window. Monsieur Poirot, I must insist we leave this room. It's getting late, and the archive must be secured. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the faint tremor in her hands. Of course, mademoiselle, he said smoothly. But first, I must ask, do you know of anyone referred to as the scribe? A colleague of Madame Christie, perhaps, or a visitor to this archive? Her face paled, and she shook her head too quickly. No, no one by that name. It's probably just one of her fancies. She was fond of riddles, you know. Indeed, Poirot said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. A fancy, perhaps, or perhaps something more. As they left the study, Poirot's mind was already mapping the next steps. The cryptic note from the letter, the coded journal, and now Miss Harper's evasiveness all were threads in a tapestry he was determined to unravel. He glanced back at the study door as it closed behind them, the lock clicking with finality. The room held secrets, and he would return. That evening, Poirot sat in his temporary lodgings at a quaint Devon inn, the notebook open before him. The inn's parlor was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth, but Poirot's attention was fixed on the coded words. He sipped a tisane, the steam curling around his mustache as he murmured to himself, the golden key, the scribe's shadow, the hollowed flame. What game are you playing, Madame Christie? He turned the pages, noting recurring symbols: a quill, a flame, a shadow cast by an unseen figure. Each seemed to point to something tangible, yet elusive. He sketched the symbols in his own notebook, his pencil moving with precision. The quill, he reasoned, represented writing Christie's craft. The flame might symbolize light, revelation, or even destruction, and the shadow, a guardian, perhaps, or a deception. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. The innkeeper, a stout woman with a cheerful demeanor, entered with a tray of scones. Thought you might fancy a bite, monsieur, she said, setting the tray down. You've been at that book for hours. Merci, madame, Poirot said, offering a polite smile. The mind, it requires sustenance as much as the body. Tell me, have you lived in this village long? Oh, born and bred, she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. Knew Dame Agatha's family, I did. Lovely folk, though she kept to herself when she was writing. Poirot leaned forward, his voice casual. And did she ever speak of a scholar? Perhaps. Someone called the scribe. The innkeeper frowned, her brow furrowing. Can't say as I recall. There was a gentleman, years back, who came to visit her. Quiet sort, always scribbling in a notebook. Folk said he was a professor or some such, but the scribe, that's new to me. Poirot's heart quickened, but his expression remained serene. Most interesting. And this gentleman, do you recall his name? She shook her head. Long time ago, monsieur. Memory's not what it was, but he stayed at this very inn, if that helps. Every detail helps, Poirot said, his mind already turning. Merci beaucoup, madame, As she left, Poirot returned to the notebook, his thoughts racing. A scholar, a notebook, a connection to Christie. The pieces were beginning to align, but the picture remained maddeningly incomplete. He resolved to visit the village tomorrow, to seek out those who might remember this mysterious visitor. The next morning, Poirot set out for the village, his cane tapping rhythmically on the cobblestones. The air was crisp, the sky a pale blue, streaked with wisps of cloud. He made his way to the local bookshop, a cramped establishment called Grayson's Tomes, where he hoped to find clues about the scholar. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and a thin, nervous man looked up from behind the counter. "Mr. Grayson, I presume," Poirot said, his voice warm but authoritative. "Yes, sir," the man replied, adjusting his spectacles. "How can I help you?" "I am Hercule Poirot, and I seek information about a visitor to this village, many years ago. A scholar, perhaps, who was acquainted with Dame Agatha Christie." Grayson's hand stilled, and Poirot noted the flicker of unease in his eyes. I wouldn't know about that, sir. I've only run the shop a few years. My father might have known, but he's passed on. Most unfortunate, Poirot said, his gaze unwavering. But perhaps you have records, old books, perhaps, with notes in the margins. Such things can be most revealing. Grayson hesitated, then nodded. I'll check the back. Wait here, please. As Grayson disappeared into a storeroom, Poirot scanned the shop. The shelves were crowded with volumes, some ancient, others merely old. His eyes caught on a slim book tucked into a corner, its spine marked with a quill symbol identical to one in Christie's notebook. He reached for it, only to hear a creak behind him. Turning, he saw Grayson reemerge, a heavy ledger in his hands and a shadow moving swiftly outside the shop window. Before Poirot could react, the bookcase beside him shuddered, then toppled forward. He leapt aside, his agility belying his age, as the case crashed to the floor, scattering books in a cloud of dust. Grayson cried out, dropping the ledger, and Poirot's heart pounded as he realized the fall was no accident. Mon Dieu, Poirot exclaimed, brushing dust from his coat. This is most irregular. Tell me, Monsieur Grayson, who else is in this shop? No one, sir, Grayson stammered, his face ashen. It must have been loose. I swear, I don't know how. Poirot held up a hand, silencing him. Enough, I will examine this bookcase myself. He knelt beside the fallen shelves, his eyes scanning for clues. A faint scratch on the floor suggested the case had been pushed, not fallen naturally, and there, caught in a splintered board, was a scrap of fabric gray wool, finely woven. Poirot pocketed it, his mind racing. Someone had tried to stop him, and they were close. Mr. Grayson, Poirot said, rising, I will take this book with the quill on its spine, and I advise you to be more forthcoming when next we speak. Grayson nodded mutely, his hands trembling. As he wrapped the book, Poirot left the shop, the bell's jingle sounding like a warning in his ears. Back at the inn, he opened the book, his fingers tracing the marginalia within. The notes were in the same code as Christie's notebook, and one phrase stood out, the hollowed flame hides the key. Poirot leaned back, his eyes narrowing. The golden key, the scribe, the hollowed flame. The clues were converging, but danger was closing in. He glanced at the window, half expecting to see a shadow watching him. Miss Harper's nervousness, Grayson's unease, the falling bookcase all pointed to a conspiracy deeper than he had imagined. As night fell, Poirot sat by the fire, the notebook and book open before him. He would return to the archive tomorrow, armed with new questions. The locked study had yielded its first secret, but it was only the beginning. The trail of the golden key was clear, and Hercule Poirot would follow it, no matter the cost. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Villa. The morning mist clung to the cobblestone streets of Torquay, curling around the quaint stone cottages like a conspirator reluctant to reveal its secrets. Hercule Poirot, clad in a neatly pressed overcoat and his signature polished shoes, stepped out of the archive's heavy oak doors, his mind alight with the cryptic note he had uncovered the previous evening. Its words seek the scribe where the quill meets the sea danced in his thoughts, teasing his little gray cells with their elusive meaning. The village, once home to Agatha Christie herself, seemed the logical place to begin his hunt for this mysterious scribe. Poirot adjusted his hat, its brim shielding his sharp eyes from the pale Devon sun, and made his way toward the heart of the village. The air carried the faint tang of salt from the nearby coast, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked scones wafting from a nearby tea-room. The note's reference to the sea suggested a connection to Torquay's maritime history, but the quill pointed to something literary, a scholar, perhaps, or a writer tied to Christie's past. Poirot's first task was to gather local knowledge, to sift through the village's gossip and memories for traces of this enigmatic figure. His polished shoes clicked rhythmically against the pavement as he approached the village square, where a small market bustled with activity. Stalls draped in colorful awnings offered everything from handmade jams to second-hand books, and villagers chatted in low, familiar tones. Poirot's presence, however, did not go unnoticed. His impeccable attire and distinctive mustache marked him as an outsider, and curious glances followed him as he paused by a stall piled high with wilted roses and lavender bundles. "Bonjour, madame," Poirot greeted the stall holder, a stout woman with flower-dusted hands and a wary smile. "I am Hercule Poirot, a visitor to your charming village. I seek information about a person known as the scribe. Perhaps you have heard of such a one." The woman's smile faltered, her hands pausing over a bundle of herbs. "The scribe, you say?" she replied, her voice tinged with caution. "That's an old tale, sir. Folks around here used to whisper about a scholar who came to see Mrs. Christie years back. Quiet man, kept to himself. Some say he was writing a book, others say he was after something valuable." Her eyes flicked toward the crowd, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "But he vanished, sudden-like. Nobody's seen him since." Poirot's interest sharpened. "This scholar, did he have a name?" The woman shrugged, busying herself with rearranging her herbs. "Can't recall." "You'd do better asking old Mr. Grayson at the bookshop. He's been here longer than most and knows all the village's stories." "Merci, madame," Poirot said, tipping his hat. The mention of a scholar intrigued him, aligning with the journal entry he had deciphered in Christie's locked study. But the woman's guarded tone suggested the village held more than idle gossip. It held secrets, perhaps dangerous ones. The bookshop, Grayson's Tomes, stood at the edge of the square, its withered sign creaking in the breeze. The windows were cluttered with faded book covers and handwritten notices advertising rare editions. A bell jangled as Poirot pushed open the door, stepping into a dimly lit room that smelled of aged paper and dust. Shelves towered to the ceiling, crammed with volumes of every size, their spines cracked and curling. Behind a cluttered counter sat Mr. Grayson, a wiry man with thinning hair and spectacles perched precariously on his nose. He was scribbling in a ledger, his movements jerky, as if startled by the bell. "Good morning, monsieur," Poirot said, his voice smooth but firm. "I am Hercule Poirot, and I am in search of information about a figure known as the scribe. I am told you are the man to speak with." Grayson's pen froze mid-stroke, and his eyes darted up, meeting Poirot's with a flicker of unease. "The scribe," he said, his voice a shade too high. "That's just a local legend, sir, some fanciful story about a scholar who pestered Mrs. Christie years ago. Nothing to it, I'm sure." He forced a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a sign he had noted Grayson's discomfort. "A legend, you say, yet legends often have a kernel of truth. Nong. Perhaps you have records, or books, that mention this scholar." "I am most interested in anything connected to Madame Christie's work." Grayson hesitated, then gestured vaguely toward the shelves. "Feel free to look around, Mr. Poirot, but I doubt you'll find much. Old stories, that's all they are." He returned to his ledger, but his hand trembled slightly, betraying his nerves. Poirot did not press further. Instead, he began to browse the shelves, his keen eye scanning for anything out of place. The shop was a labyrinth of literature, with books stacked haphazardly, some spilling onto the floor. As he moved deeper into the aisles, he felt the weight of Grayson's gaze following him, though the bookseller remained at his counter, pretending to work. In a shadowed corner, Poirot's attention was drawn to a slim volume tucked behind a row of dusty encyclopedias. Its leather cover was worn, its title embossed in faint gold, The Quill and the Tide. The reference to a quill, so close to the cryptic note's wording, was too striking to ignore. Poirot carefully extracted the book, noting its weight and the faint creak of its binding. Opening it, he found it was a collection of essays on Devon's literary history, published in 1952. But what caught his eye were the handwritten marginalia scrawled in the margins of several pages, lines of numbers and letters that bore a striking resemblance to the code in Christie's journal. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his fingers tracing the annotations. The marginalia formed a pattern, a sequence of symbols interspersed with phrases, like the scribe's shadow and the hidden muse. This was no coincidence. The book was a clue, perhaps left by the scribe himself. Poirot tucked the volume under his arm, intending to examine it further, and turned to approach the counter. As he did, a faint creak sounded above him, followed by a low groan of wood. Poirot's instincts, honed by years of narrowly escaping danger, flared. He glanced up just as a towering bookcase, laden with heavy tomes, began to tilt toward him. With agility surprising for his compact frame, Poirot dove aside, landing hard against a nearby shelf as the bookcase crashed to the floor, sending a cloud of dust and splintered wood into the air. Books scattered like fallen leaves, and the shop's silence was shattered by the echo of the collapse. Grayson rushed from behind the counter, his face a mask of shock. "Good heavens! Are you all right, sir?" he cried, wringing his hands. "I don't know how that happened. The shelves are old, you see, and—" Poirot rose, brushing dust from his coat with deliberate calm. "It is curious, monsieur, that a shelf should fall at precisely the moment I am beneath it," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. "Perhaps you can explain this accident." Grayson's face paled, and he stammered, "I assure you, it was nothing of the sort. The shop is old, and things shift. I'll have it looked at, I promise." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. The incident was no mere mishap. Someone had intended to harm him, or at least to warn him off. The book still clutched in his hand felt heavier now, its secret suddenly more dangerous. "I will take this book, monsieur," he said, placing it on the counter, "and I trust there will be no further accidents." Grayson nodded hurriedly, ringing up the purchase with shaking hands. As Poirot left the shop, the bell jangling behind him, he felt the prickle of being watched. He paused at the threshold, scanning the square. A figure in a dark coat stood near the market stalls, too far to identify, but close enough to be deliberate. When Poirot took a step toward them, the figure turned and vanished into the crowd. Back at his lodgings, a modest inn overlooking the harbor, Poirot spread the book's pages across a small table, his magnifying glass in hand. The marginalia were indeed a cipher, similar to the one in Christie's journal but more complex. Hours passed as he worked, his mind a whirl of patterns and possibilities. By lamplight, he cracked the code, revealing a message. The scribe's truth lies where the tide meets the page, in the shadow of the muse. The words were poetic, almost mocking, but they confirmed the book's importance. The muse suggested Christie herself, and the tide pointed again to the sea, perhaps a specific location in Toqay. As night fell, Poirot stepped onto the inn's balcony, the distant crash of waves filling the air. The village, with its charming facade, was a maze of hidden truths, and someone was determined to keep them buried. The falling bookcase was no accident, and the figure in the square was no idle passerby. Poirot's investigation had stirred a hornet's nest, but he was undeterred. The scribe's identity, and the treasure they guarded, was within his grasp. With the book's cipher as his guide, he resolved to follow the trail to its next clue, wherever it might lead. The chapter closed with Poirot returning to the table, his eyes gleaming with determination. The shadows of Torquay held secrets, but Hercule Poirot was no stranger to unraveling them. Tomorrow, he would seek the place where the tide met the page, and the scribe's truth would be one step closer to the light. Chapter 4. The golden Keith morning sun filtered through the high, arched windows of the Devon archive, casting a mosaic of light and shadow across the oak-paneled walls. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the locked study, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the early hour. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and polished wood, a perfume that stirred his senses as keenly as any clue. In his mind, the cryptic note from the previous day danced like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Seek the golden key where shadows hold sway, and the scribe's secret shall light your way. The study, once Agatha Christie's private sanctuary, was a shrine to her genius. Shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound tomes, manuscripts, and neatly stacked notebooks, their pages yellowed but pristine. A mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with an inkwell, a silver letter opener, and a candelabrum that seemed oddly out of place in the modern electric glow. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the space. The note's mention of a golden key was no metaphor, he was certain. Somewhere in this room, a physical key awaited him, a key to unlock the next step in this literary treasure hunt. He began his inspection with methodical precision, tapping the desk's edges for hollow compartments, running his fingers along the bookshelves for hidden catches. The study was silent save for the soft creak of floorboards beneath his polished shoes. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, a rustle, like the whisper of paper. He froze, his head tilting slightly. The noise came again, from the direction of the candelabrum. Poirot approached it, his movements deliberate, his eyes fixed on the ornate silver piece. It was an antique, its 3 arms curling like tendrils, each holding a candle that had long since burned to a stub. He lifted the candelabrum gently, testing its weight. It was heavier than it should be. His lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Mon ami, you hide your secrets well," he murmured, addressing the absent Agatha Christie. With a deft twist, he unscrewed the base, revealing a hollow compartment. Inside, nestled in a velvet lining, was a small, golden key, its surface etched with intricate filigree. Poirot held it to the light, admiring its craftsmanship. "The golden key," he said softly, "but to what lock?" His gaze swept the room anew, searching for a match. The desk yielded no secrets, nor did the shelves. Then his eyes fell on a small, ornate box tucked unobtrusively on a side table, half hidden beneath a lace doily. It was made of rosewood, inlaid with mother of pearl, and bore a tiny keyhole that seemed to beckon the golden key. Poirot's heart quickened, though his expression remained composed. He inserted the key, and with a satisfying click, the lock turned. The box opened to reveal a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. Poirot unfolded it with the reverence of an archaeologist uncovering a relic. It was a map, hand-drawn in ink, depicting the layout of Christie's estate. The lines were precise, the annotations meticulous, yet certain symbols, a crescent moon, a quill, a sundial, were unfamiliar, their meaning elusive. Poirot's brow furrowed as he traced the map with a gloved finger. "A treasure map, n'est-ce pas? But what treasure do you conceal, Madame Christie?" He was so absorbed that he nearly missed the soft creak of the door behind him. His head snapped up, and he turned just as Miss Evelyn Harper, the archives curator, stepped into the room. Her sharp gray eyes widened at the sight of the open box and the map in Poirot's hands. She was a tall woman, her auburn hair pulled into a severe bun, her tweed suit as crisp as her demeanor. But now, her composure faltered, a flicker of alarm crossing her face before she masked it with a polite smile. "Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed, her voice a touch too bright. "I didn't expect to find you here so early, have you?" found something of interest. Poirot's smile was disarming, his tone as smooth as velvet. Mademoiselle Harper, one does not expect to find a rose blooming in the dawn. Yet here you are, radiant as ever. As for my discoveries, eh bien, this room is a treasure trove of Madame Christie's genius. I merely explore its wonders. Her eyes darted to the map, and Poirot noted the subtle tightening of her jaw. That's an old document, she said quickly. Likely one of Agatha's sketches for a novel setting. Nothing more. Perhaps, Poirot said, folding the map and slipping it into his pocket with a casual air. But to the trained eye, even a sketch may reveal a masterpiece. Tell me, mademoiselle, did Madame Christie ever speak of a golden key or a scribe in her confidences? Miss Harper's smile stiffened. A scribe? No, I'm afraid not. As for keys, this archive is full of old trinkets. They're hardly significant. She stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly. You really must be careful, Monsieur Poirot. These artifacts are delicate, and accidents can happen. The warning hung in the air, veiled but unmistakable. Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Merci for your concern, mademoiselle. I am, as always, the soul of caution. Now, if you will excuse me, I have matters to attend to. He moved toward the door, but Miss Harper's voice stopped him. Monsieur Poirot, I must insist you leave such items in the archive. They belong here. Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming, with a quiet challenge. Mon ami, the truth belongs to no one. Yet it is my duty to find it. This map, I believe, wishes to take a small journey with me. Fear not, it shall return when its purpose is fulfilled. Before she could protest further, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Miss Harper stared after him, her hands trembling slightly. She glanced at the open box, then at the candelabrum, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Too clever by half," she muttered, before hurrying to her office to make a discreet telephone call. Outside, Poirot walked briskly through the archive's manicured gardens, the map burning a hole in his pocket. The estate sprawled before him, its rolling lawns and ancient trees bathed in golden light. He paused by a stone fountain, its water sparkling like diamonds, and unfolded the map once more. The symbols intrigued him: the crescent moon, the quill, the sundial. They were not random, he was certain. Christie's mind was too precise for such whimsy. But what did they mean? His thoughts were interrupted by a rustling in the nearby hedge. He turned, his hand tightening on his walking stick, but saw nothing. The garden was still, save for the chirping of birds and the distant hum of a groundskeeper's mower. Yet Poirot's instincts, honed by years of unraveling mysteries, told him he was not alone. Someone was watching, waiting. He tucked the map away and resumed his walk, his pace unhurried but his senses alert. Back in his room at the village inn, Poirot spread the map across a small table, illuminating it with a desk lamp. The estate's layout was clear: the manor house, the stables, the rose garden, the orchard. The symbols, however, were concentrated in the garden, particularly around the sundial. He tapped his chin, his little gray cells working furiously. "The scribe's secret shall light your way," he murmured, recalling the note. "The sundial? Pater. It captures the light, does it not?" He decided to investigate the garden at dusk, when the shadows would be longest, perhaps revealing the meaning of where shadows hold sway. But first, he needed to ensure the maps. Chapter 4. The golden Keith morning sun filtered through the high, arched windows of the Devon archive, casting a mosaic of light and shadow across the oak-paneled walls. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the locked study, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the early hour. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and polished wood, a perfume that stirred his senses as keenly as any clue. In his mind, the cryptic note from the previous day danced like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Seek the golden key where shadows hold sway, and the scribe's secret shall light your way. The study, once Agatha Christie's private sanctuary, was a shrine to her genius. Shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound tomes, manuscripts, and neatly stacked notebooks, their pages yellowed but pristine. A mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with an inkwell, a silver letter opener, and a candelabrum that seemed oddly out of place in the modern electric glow. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the space. The note's mention of a golden key was no metaphor, he was certain. Somewhere in this room, a physical key awaited him, a key to unlock the next step in this literary treasure hunt. He began his inspection with methodical precision, tapping the desk's edges for hollow compartments, running his fingers along the bookshelves for hidden catches. The study was silent save for the soft creak of floorboards beneath his polished shoes. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, a rustle, like the whisper of paper. He froze, his head tilting slightly. The noise came again, from the direction of the candelabrum. Poirot approached it, his movements deliberate, his eyes fixed on the ornate silver piece. It was an antique, its 3 arms curling like tendrils, each holding a candle that had long since burned to a stub. He lifted the candelabrum gently, testing its weight. It was heavier than it should be. His lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Mon ami, you hide your secrets well," he murmured, addressing the absent Agatha Christie. With a deft twist, he unscrewed the base, revealing a hollow compartment. Inside, nestled in a velvet lining, was a small, golden key, its surface etched with intricate filigree. Poirot held it to the light, admiring its craftsmanship. "The golden key," he said softly, "but to what lock?" His gaze swept the room anew, searching for a match. The desk yielded no secrets, nor did the shelves. Then his eyes fell on a small, ornate box tucked unobtrusively on a side table, half hidden beneath a lace doily. It was made of rosewood, inlaid with mother of pearl, and bore a tiny keyhole that seemed to beckon the golden key. Poirot's heart quickened, though his expression remained composed. He inserted the key, and with a satisfying click, the lock turned. The box opened to reveal a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. Poirot unfolded it with the reverence of an archaeologist uncovering a relic. It was a map, hand-drawn in ink, depicting the layout of Christie's estate. The lines were precise, the annotations meticulous, yet certain symbols, a crescent moon, a quill, a sundial, were unfamiliar, their meaning elusive. Poirot's brow furrowed as he traced the map with a gloved finger. A treasure map, n'est-ce pas? But what treasure do you conceal, Madame Christie? He was so absorbed that he nearly missed the soft creak of the door behind him. His head snapped up, and he turned just as Miss Evelyn Harper, the archives curator, stepped into the room. Her sharp gray eyes widened at the sight of the open box and the map in Poirot's hands. She was a tall woman, her auburn hair pulled into a severe bun, her tweed suit as crisp as her demeanor. But now, her composure faltered, a flicker of alarm crossing her face before she masked it with a polite smile. "Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed, her voice a touch too bright. "I didn't expect to find you here so early. Have you found something of interest?" Poirot's smile was disarming, his tone as smooth as velvet. "Mademoiselle Harper, one does not expect to find a rose blooming in the dawn, yet here you are, radiant as ever. As for my discoveries, eh bien, this room is a treasure trove of Madame Christie's genius. I merely explore its wonders." Her eyes darted to the map, and Poirot noted the subtle tightening of her jaw. "That's an old document," she said quickly. "Likely one of Agatha's sketches for a novel setting." "Nothing more, perhaps," Poirot said, folding the map and slipping it into his pocket with a casual air. "But to the trained eye, even a sketch may reveal a masterpiece. Tell me, mademoiselle, did Madame Christie ever speak of a golden key or a scribe in her confidences?" Miss Harper's smile stiffened. "A scribe? No, I'm afraid not. As for keys, this archive is full of old trinkets. They're hardly significant." She stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly. You really must be careful, Monsieur Poirot. These artifacts are delicate, and accidents can happen. The warning hung in the air, veiled but unmistakable. Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Merci for your concern, mademoiselle. I am, as always, the soul of caution. Now, if you will excuse me, I have matters to attend to. He moved toward the door, but Miss Harper's voice stopped him. Monsieur Poirot, I must insist you leave such items in the archive. They belong here. Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming, with a quiet challenge. Mon ami, the truth belongs to no one. Yet it is my duty to find it. This map, I believe, wishes to take a small journey with me. Fear not, it shall return when its purpose is fulfilled. Before she could protest further, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Miss Harper stared after him, her hands trembling slightly. She glanced at the open box, then at the candelabrum, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Too clever by half," she muttered, before hurrying to her office to make a discreet telephone call. Outside, Poirot walked briskly through the archive's manicured gardens, the map burning a hole in his pocket. The estate sprawled before him, its rolling lawns and ancient trees bathed in golden light. He paused by a stone fountain, its water sparkling like diamonds, and unfolded the map once more. The symbols intrigued him: the crescent moon, the quill, the sundial. They were not random, he was certain. Christie's mind was too precise for such whimsy. But what did they mean? His thoughts were interrupted by a rustling in the nearby hedge. He turned, his hand tightening on his walking stick, but saw nothing. The garden was still, save for the chirping of birds and the distant hum of a groundskeeper's mower. Yet Poirot's instincts, honed by years of unraveling mysteries, told him he was not alone. Someone was watching, waiting. He tucked the map away and resumed his walk, his pace unhurried, but his senses alert. Back in his room at the village inn, Poirot spread the map across a small table, illuminating it with a desk lamp. The estate's layout was clear: the manor house, the stables, the rose garden, the orchard. The symbols, however, were concentrated in the garden, particularly around the sundial. He tapped his chin, his little gray cells working furiously. "The scribe's secret shall light your way," he murmured, recalling the note. "The sundial? Pater. It captures the light, does it not?" He decided to investigate the garden at dusk, when the shadows would be longest, perhaps revealing the meaning of where shadows hold sway. But first, he needed to ensure the maps. Chapter 5. The garden riddle. The morning sun cast a golden haze over the sprawling grounds of Agatha Christie's former estate in Devon, its rays filtering through ancient oaks and tangling in the overgrown brambles that had long reclaimed the garden. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the rural setting, adjusted his hat and surveyed the scene with a discerning eye. The map he had uncovered in the previous chapter, a delicate, hand-drawn sketch marked with cryptic symbols, lay folded in his pocket, its secrets whispering of a treasure hidden somewhere in this verdant chaos. His polished shoes sank slightly into the dew-soaked earth as he stepped forward, his mind already turning over the puzzle before him. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, stroking his mustache. "This garden, it is a labyrinth of nature. Non, but Hercule Poirot, he does not fear the wilderness, the order. It lies beneath the surface, waiting for the little gray cells to uncover it." The estate's garden was no mere plot of flowers. It was a sprawling maze of hedges, rosebeds, and crumbling stone paths, left to the whims of time since Christie's departure decades ago. The map, inked in her precise hand, had pointed Poirot here, its symbols a crescent moon, a spiral, and a curious star etched beside a sketch of what he deduced was a sundial at the garden's heart. The challenge now was to navigate the overgrowth and decipher the symbols' meaning before the unseen eyes he sensed watching him could intervene. As he ventured deeper, the air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. The path narrowed, flanked by towering yew hedges that seemed to whisper secrets in the breeze. Poirot's eyes darted to every shadow, his senses sharpened by the incident at Grayson's bookshop the previous day. The falling bookcase had been no accident, and though he had no proof, he felt the weight of surveillance, as if the garden itself were complicit in the mystery. He paused at a fork in the path, consulting the map. The crescent moon symbol was drawn near a cluster of roses, which he spotted to his left, their thorns glinting like tiny daggers. Kneeling, he examined the base of the rosebush, careful not to snag his pristine suit. His fingers brushed against something hard beneath the soil, a small, rusted metal box, its surface etched with the same crescent moon. His heart quickened, but he maintained his composure, glancing around to ensure he was alone. "Eh bien," he said softly, "Madame Christie, you are clever indeed. But Poirot, he is more clever still." With a gentle tug, he unearthed the box, its hinges protesting as he pried it open. Inside lay a folded parchment, yellowed with age, and a small brass key, its head shaped like a spiral. The parchment bore a single line in Christie's elegant script: "Seek the star where time stands still, and the scribe's secret shall be yours." Poirot's eyes gleamed. The sundial, marked with the star on the map, was the next step, but the spiral key puzzled him. Its shape matched the map's second symbol, suggesting it unlocked something yet to be found. As he pocketed the key and parchment, a twig snapped behind him. He froze, his hand hovering near the concealed pocket where he kept a small penknife, not a weapon, but a tool for a gentleman of resource. Turning slowly, he saw nothing but the swaying branches of a willow, yet the air felt charged, as if the garden held its breath. Poirot straightened, his voice calm but firm. "Who is there? Show yourself. S'il vous plaît." Hercule Poirot does not play games with shadows. Silence answered, broken only by the distant call of a cuckoo. He waited, his sharp eyes scanning the foliage, but no one emerged. Deciding to press on, he followed the map's path toward the sundial, his steps measured but swift. The garden seemed to close in around him, the hedges taller, the shadows deeper. He could not shake the sense that his discovery of the box had triggered something a hunter stirred from its lair. The sundial stood in a clearing, its stone face withered but proud, its gnomon casting a slender shadow across Roman numerals. The star symbol was carved into its base, almost invisible beneath a patina of moss. Poirot knelt again, brushing away the green veil with a handkerchief. The carving was precise, its edges sharp despite the years. He ran his fingers along it, searching for a mechanism, but found none. The spiral key, he suspected, was meant for another lock, but the sundial held the next clue. He reread the parchment: "Seek the star where time stands still." The phrase nagged at him. A sundial marked time's passage, yet the clue suggested a moment frozen. He circled the structure, his mind racing. Then a flash of insight struck. The gnomon's shadow, at a certain hour, might reveal the star's secret. But which hour? The map offered no time, and the sun was already climbing toward noon. Poirot paced, his thoughts a symphony of logic. Christie, a master of misdirection, would not make the solution so simple. He recalled the coded journal from the archive, which had mentioned the scribe and a golden key. The spiral key in his pocket was brass, not gold, suggesting it was a secondary tool. Perhaps the sundial's star aligned with another element, a physical marker in the garden. He scanned the clearing. A stone bench, overgrown with ivy, sat opposite the sundial. Its armrest bore a faint spiral carving, barely visible beneath the greenery. Poirot's pulse quickened. He approached, clearing the ivy to reveal a small keyhole, its shape matching the spiral key. With a steady hand, he inserted the key and turned it. A soft click echoed, and a panel in the bench slid open, revealing a sealed tin box, its lid embossed with a crescent moon and star. "Magnifique," Poirot whispered, his satisfaction tempered by caution. He lifted the tin, its weight suggesting something substantial within. As he opened it, a folded letter slipped out, its wax seal unbroken, bearing the initials AC. His fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal, revealing a single page written in Christie's hand. "My dear scribe, It began, "If you read this, you have followed the path I laid. The treasure is not gold, nor jewels, but a truth that transcends wealth. Guard it well, for others will seek to claim it for their own ends." The final key lies where the heart of the story beats. "Trust your mind, as I have trusted mine." Poirot's eyes lingered on the words. The treasure beyond gold intrigued him, hinting at a literary secret, perhaps a manuscript of unparalleled value. The mention of the heart of the story suggested another clue, possibly within Christie's works or her personal history. But before he could ponder further, a rustle in the hedges snapped him back to the present. He slipped the letter into his coat and closed the tin, tucking it under his arm. The rustle grew louder, deliberate now, and Poirot's instinct screamed of danger. He stepped behind the sundial, using its bulk as cover, and peered through the gaps in the foliage. A figure moved in the shadows, a man, tall and lean, his face obscured by a hat. Poirot's mind raced. Was this the bookseller, Grayson, or another agent of the mysterious force tracking him? The figure paused, scanning the clearing. Poirot held his breath, his hand tightening around the tin. The man took a step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel path. Then, as if sensing Poirot's presence, he turned and darted into the hedges, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. Poirot waited, counting to 10, before emerging. The garden was silent again, but the encounter left him uneasy. "Someone does not wish Poirot to succeed?" he muttered. But they underestimate the determination of Hercule Poirot. He considered his options. Returning to the archive risked drawing attention, but the letter's clue demanded further investigation. The heart of the story could refer to Christie's study, her manuscripts, or even her childhood home. For now, he needed to secure the letter and tin, and evade his pursuer. The village inn, where he had taken a room, was a temporary refuge, but he would need to move quickly. As he retraced his steps through the garden, Poirot's mind churned. The letter's tone suggested a personal connection between Christie and the scribe, perhaps a collaborator or confidant. The treasure, whatever it was significant enough to warrant such elaborate concealment, and the presence of a stalker confirmed that others knew of its existence. Perhaps the mysterious collector Grayson had hinted at, or a rival scholar seeking glory. The path led him back to the rose garden, where he paused to check for followers. The air was still, but his instincts prickled. He knelt by the rose bush, pretending to adjust his shoe, and used the moment to scan his surroundings. A glint of metal caught his eye, a small, discarded cigarette case half buried in the soil. He retrieved it, noting its monogram. LV. His lips curled into a faint smile. Leonard Vance, the vanished scholar, had been here. The case was a breadcrumb, proof that Poirot was on the right trail. Tucking the case into his pocket, he hurried toward the garden's edge, where the estate met the village road. The inn was a short walk, but he chose a circuitous route, doubling back through an orchard to throw off any pursuit. As he moved, he reflected on the letter's words, "Trust your mind, as I have trusted mine." Christie had crafted this puzzle for someone of equal intellect, and Poirot felt the weight of her challenge. He would not disappoint her. At the inn, he slipped into his room, locking the door behind him. The tin and letter lay on the table, their secrets tantalizingly close. He poured a glass of water, his one concession to the morning's exertion, and sat to examine his finds. The cigarette case, he noted, bore traces of soil matching the garden's, suggesting Vance had dropped it during his own search. The letter, with its cryptic reference to the heart of the story, pointed to a deeper layer of the mystery, perhaps a manuscript, a diary, or a truth about Christie herself. As he pondered, a soft knock at the door startled him. He rose, his hand on the penknife, and called out, "Who is it?" "Mr. Poirot," a woman's voice replied, hesitant but familiar. "It's Evelyn Harper, from the archive." I need to speak with you." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Miss Harper, the curator who had caught him with the map, had been evasive, her demeanor hinting at hidden knowledge. Her arrival now, so soon after his escape from the garden, was no coincidence. He opened the door a crack, his expression polite but guarded. "Mademoiselle Harper, what brings you here at such an hour?" Her face was pale, her hands twisting nervously. "I saw you leave the garden," she said, her voice low. "You found something, didn't you? Please, Mr. Poirot, you must tell me. It's important." Poirot studied her, his mind weighing her words against her earlier secrecy. Was she in a lie, a foe, or a pawn in a larger game? He smiled, his tone disarming. "Mademoiselle, you ask much, but you tell little. Perhaps you share what you know, and Poirot, he will consider your request." She hesitated, glancing down the hall as if fearing eavesdroppers. "Not here," she whispered. "Meet me at the archive tonight, after hours. I'll explain everything." Before he could respond, she turned and hurried away, her footsteps echoing in the quiet inn. Poirot closed the door, his mind alight with possibilities. Miss Harper's urgency suggested she knew of the treasure or feared its discovery. The garden stalker, the cigarette case, and now this clandestine meeting, wove a tapestry of intrigue that Poirot was determined to unravel. He returned to the table, unfolding the letter once more. The words, the heart of the story glowed in his mind, a beacon in the fog of clues. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing: the garden had yielded its riddle, but the true treasure remained just out of reach. With a final sip of water, he resolved to meet Miss Harper, ready to face whatever secrets the night would reveal. Chapter 6. The scholar's shadowed morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Devon, wrapping the village of Greenway in a shroud of silver. Hercule Poirot, his mustache impeccably waxed despite the early hour, adjusted his hat and stepped out of the taxi that had brought him from the archive. His polished shoes clicked against the cobblestones as he made his way toward the local historical society, a quaint stone building nestled between a bakery and a florist's shop. The cryptic letter from Agatha Christie to the scribe, found beneath the sundial in the estate's garden, weighed heavily in his mind. Its words, "a treasure beyond gold," had ignited his curiosity, but the mention of a mysterious figure known only as the scribe had set his little gray cells ablaze. Today, he intended to uncover the identity of this elusive scholar. The historical society was a modest affair, its facade adorned with ivy and a weathered sign reading Greenway Historical Society, Est, 1892. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and polished wood, a comforting scent for a man like Poirot, who revered order and the preservation of knowledge. The society's curator, a wiry man named Mr. Clarence Whitby, greeted him with a nervous smile. Whitby's spectacles sat crookedly on his nose, and his hands fidgeted as he led Poirot to a reading room lined with oak shelves. "Monsieur Whitby," Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet, "I am seeking information about a scholar who visited Madame Christie many years ago. A man known, perhaps, as the scribe. Does this name stir any memories?" Whitby's eyes widened, and he pushed his spectacles up his nose. "The scribe, that's an odd one. Can't say it rings a bell, Mr. Poirot, but we've got records of visitors to Greenway House going back decades. Scholars, writers, all sorts came to see Mrs. Christie. Let me fetch the ledgers." As Whitby scurried off, Poirot surveyed the room. The shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound volumes, local histories, and faded photographs of Greenway's past. A portrait of Agatha Christie hung above the fireplace, her eyes sharp and knowing, as if she were watching Poirot's every move. He felt a prickle of excitement somewhere in this room, he sensed. Lay the next piece of the puzzle. Whitby returned with a stack of dusty ledgers, their pages yellowed and curling. "These cover the 1940s and 50s, when Mrs. Christie was most active here. If your scribe visited, he'd be in here somewhere." Poirot set to work, his gloved fingers turning pages with precision. The ledgers were meticulously kept, listing names, dates, and purposes of visits. He scanned for anything unusual, his mind attuned to the smallest irregularity. After an hour, a single entry caught his eye: Dr. Leonard Vance, literary scholar, Oxford, Visited the 12th of August 1948. Purpose: consultation on unpublished manuscripts. Dr. Vance, Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. A scholar from Oxford. This, I think, is promising. Whitby, hovering nearby, leaned closer. Vance, you say? I've heard that name. There's a story about him, bit of a local legend. They say he came to Greenway to work with Mrs. Christie on something secret, then vanished. No one knows what happened to him. Vanished. Poirot's mustache twitched. This is most interesting. Tell me, Monsieur Whitby, are there any records of Dr. Vance's work? A notebook, perhaps, or correspondence. Whitby scratched his chin. There might be something in the archives downstairs. We've got boxes of old papers that haven't been catalogued properly. Donations from locals, mostly odds and ends from the Christie estate. You're welcome to look, but it's a bit of a maze down there. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A maze, you say? Hercule Poirot has never been deterred by complexity. Lead the way, if you please. The basement of the Historical Society was a stark contrast to the orderly reading room above. Narrow aisles wound between towering stacks of crates and boxes, their labels faded or missing. The air was damp, and a single flickering bulb cast long shadows across the stone floor. Whitby handed Poirot a flashlight, muttering apologies about the state of the archives. We've been meaning to organize this, but, well, funding's tight. Poirot, undaunted, began his search. He moved methodically, checking labels and lifting lids, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The boxes contained everything, from old tax records to photographs of village fates, but nothing related to Dr. Vance. As the minutes ticked by, Poirot's frustration grew not at the task, but at the nagging sense that he was being watched. The shadows seemed to shift just beyond his beam, and a faint creak echoed from the far end of the basement. He paused, his hand resting on a crate labeled Miscellaneous Donations, 1950s. Who is there? He called softly, his voice steady, but commanding. Silence answered, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He turned back to the crate, lifting the lid to reveal a jumble of papers, photographs, and a small, leather-bound notebook, its cover embossed with the initials. L.V. Poirot's heart quickened. He opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with dense, precise handwriting. The entries were dated 1948, and they detailed Vance's meetings with Agatha Christie. One passage stood out. AC speaks of a literary treasure, a work that could redefine the art of the novel. She calls it the eternal quill, but will not reveal its location. She fears its power, yet trusts me to guard its secret. The clues are hidden in her papers, woven into her stories. I must find them before the others do. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered. The eternal quill, this is the treasure beyond gold. He flipped through the pages, finding sketches of symbols that matched those on the map from the archive's ornate box. Vance had been close, perhaps too close to uncovering Christie's secret. As Poirot read, a sudden hum filled the basement, and the bulb above flickered wildly before plunging the room into darkness. The flashlight in his hand sputtered, its beam weakening. A rustle came from the aisle behind him, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, deliberate, cautious, and closing in. Poirot's mind raced. He slipped the notebook into his coat pocket and switched off the flashlight, plunging himself into total darkness. He pressed himself against a crate, his breath steady despite the pounding of his heart. The footsteps stopped, and a low voice muttered, "He's here somewhere. Find him, to people, then." Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. He had faced worse odds. Moving silently, he edged along the aisle, using his memory of the basement's layout to guide him. The crates formed a labyrinth, and he intended to use it to his advantage. He reached a junction and paused, listening. One set of footsteps moved to his left, the other to his right. They were splitting up to trap him. Poirot's mind worked like a finely tuned machine. The basement had one exit, a narrow staircase at the far end. To reach it, he would need to outmaneuver his pursuers. He recalled a stack of crates near the stairs, precariously balanced. If he could lure his pursuers there, he might create a diversion. He moved swiftly, his steps light as a cat's. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small coin and tossed it toward the opposite side of the basement. It clinked against a crate, and the footsteps to his left pivoted sharply. "Over there," the voice hissed. Poirot seized the moment. He darted toward the stairs, weaving through the aisles. As he neared the stack of crates, he heard the second set of footsteps closing in. With a calculated shove, he pushed against the stack, sending a cascade of boxes tumbling into the aisle. A shout of surprise echoed, followed by a crash as the pursuer stumbled. The path led him back to the rose garden, where he paused to check for followers. The air was still, but his instincts prickled. He knelt by the rose bush, pretending to adjust his shoe, and used the moment to scan his surroundings. A glint of metal caught his eye, a small, discarded cigarette case half buried in the soil. He retrieved it, noting its monogram. LV. His lips curled into a faint smile. Leonard Vance, the vanished scholar, had been here. The case was a breadcrumb, proof that Poirot was on the right trail. Tucking the case into his pocket, he hurried toward the garden's edge, where the estate met the village road. The inn was a short walk, but he chose a circuitous route, doubling back through an orchard to throw off any pursuit. As he moved, he reflected on the letter's words, "Trust your mind, as I have trusted mine." Christie had crafted this puzzle for someone of equal intellect, and Poirot felt the weight of her challenge. He would not disappoint her. At the inn, he slipped into his room, locking the door behind him. The tin and letter lay on the table, their secrets tantalizingly close. He poured a glass of water, his one concession to the morning's exertion, and sat to examine his finds. The cigarette case, he noted, bore traces of soil matching the garden's, suggesting Vance had dropped it during his own search. The letter, with its cryptic reference to the heart of the story, pointed to a deeper layer of the mystery, perhaps a manuscript, a diary, or a truth about Christie herself. As he pondered, a soft knock at the door startled him. He rose, his hand on the penknife, and called out, "Who is it?" "Mr. Poirot," a woman's voice replied, hesitant but familiar. "It's Evelyn Harper, from the archive." I need to speak with you." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Miss Harper, the curator who had caught him with the map, had been evasive, her demeanor hinting at hidden knowledge. Her arrival now, so soon after his escape from the garden, was no coincidence. He opened the door a crack, his expression polite but guarded. "Mademoiselle Harper, what brings you here at such an hour?" Her face was pale, her hands twisting nervously. "I saw you leave the garden," she said, her voice low. "You found something, didn't you?" "Please, Mr. Poirot, you must tell me. It's important." Poirot studied her, his mind weighing her words against her earlier secrecy. Was she an ally, a foe, or a pawn in a larger game? He smiled, his tone disarming. "Mademoiselle, you ask much, but you tell little. Perhaps you share what you know, and Poirot, he will consider your request." She hesitated, glancing down the hall as if fearing eavesdroppers. "Not here," she whispered. "Meet me at the archive tonight, after hours. I'll explain everything." Before he could respond, she turned and hurried away, her footsteps echoing in the quiet inn. Poirot closed the door, his mind alight with possibilities. Miss Harper's urgency suggested she knew of the treasure or feared its discovery. The garden stalker, the cigarette case, and now this clandestine meeting, wove a tapestry of intrigue that Poirot was determined to unravel. He returned to the table, unfolding the letter once more. The words, the heart of the story, glowed in his mind, a beacon in the fog of clues. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing: the garden had yielded its riddle, but the true treasure remained just out of reach. With a final sip of water, he resolved to meet Miss Harper, ready to face whatever secrets the night would reveal. Chapter 7. The hidden manuscript. Morning sun filtered through the leaded windows of the Devon archive, casting a lattice of light across the oak-paneled walls. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in his pinstripe suit, stood in the heart of the archives reading room, his mustache twitching with anticipation. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather bindings, a perfume that stirred his little gray cells into a frenzy of deduction. The cryptic note from the locked study, the coded journal, the golden key, and the map from Christie's estate had led him here, to this very moment. Each clue had been a breadcrumb in a trail laid by the ingenious Agatha Christie herself, and now, Poirot sensed, he was on the cusp of a revelation. He adjusted his bow tie and surveyed the room. Shelves towered to the ceiling, laden with manuscripts, letters, and journals, all meticulously catalogued, or so it seemed. Poirot's sharp eyes, however, detected an anomaly: a single shelf, slightly misaligned, its books leaning at an odd angle as if disturbed by an unseen hand. He approached, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the polished floor, and ran a gloved finger along the spines. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, Death on the Nile, Murder on the Orient Express, all familiar titles, but one volume caught his attention. It was a nondescript leather-bound book, its spine blank, tucked between two of Christie's lesser-known works. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, pulling the book free. It was heavier than expected, its pages yellowed but pristine. The title page read The Vanishing Muse, an unpublished manuscript by Agatha Christie, its existence unknown to the literary world. His heart quickened. Could this be the literary treasure hinted at in the coded journal? He opened it, and a faint scent of lavender wafted out, a signature of Christie's personal stationery. But what truly arrested his attention were the handwritten annotations in the margins, penned in a precise, unfamiliar script. The ink was fresher than the manuscript's age would suggest, and the notes referenced symbols and phrases that mirrored the clues Poirot had uncovered: the golden key, the sundial's shadow, and, most intriguingly, the scribe's legacy. Poirot's mind raced. These annotations were not Christie's, they bore the meticulous hand of Dr. Leonard Vance, the reclusive scholar whose notebook Poirot had retrieved from the Historical Society. The manuscript was no mere story, it was a cipher, a narrative woven with clues to the treasure's location. He turned the pages, his eyes scanning the text. The story within was a tale of a missing writer, a labyrinth in a state, and a secret society, its plot eerily paralleling Poirot's own investigation. Each chapter ended with a cryptic phrase, and the annotations linked these two physical locations on Christie's estate. It was as if Christie had written a fictional guide to her real-life secret, and Vance had decoded it. A soft creak interrupted his thoughts. Poirot's head snapped up, his senses alert. The archive was supposed to be empty, save for Miss Evelyn Harper, the curator, who had retreated to her office an hour ago. Yet the sound came from the far end of the room, near a spiral staircase leading to the upper galleries. He closed the manuscript and slipped it into his satchel, moving silently toward the noise. The light dimmed as clouds passed over the sun, casting the room into a chiaroscuro of shadows. Another creak, this time closer. Poirot's hand tightened around his walking stick, its silver handle a reassuring weight. "Quis law," he called, softly, his voice steady but laced with authority. No answer came, but a shadow flickered across the shelves. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He stepped into the aisle, his movements deliberate, like a cat stalking prey. The shadow vanished, but a faint rustle of fabric betrayed its owner's retreat. He followed, ascending the spiral staircase with surprising agility for a man of his stature. The upper gallery was a maze of alcoves, each filled with rare manuscripts and locked cabinets. The air was cooler here, the silence oppressive. At the end of the gallery, a door stood ajar, leading to a storage room. Poirot pushed it open, revealing a clutter of crates and dusty shelves. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows. He scanned the room, his gaze settling on a stack of papers that had been disturbed, their edges misaligned. Someone had been here, searching for something, perhaps the very manuscript now in his satchel. He knelt to examine the papers, noting a faint footprint in the dust, the tread of a woman's shoe. Miss Harper. He wondered, recalling her evasive demeanor when he'd questioned her about the locked study. Before he could ponder further, the telephone in the reading room below shrilled, its ring slicing through the silence. Poirot descended swiftly, his satchel clutched tightly. He reached the phone just as it fell silent, but the receiver was still warm, as if someone had used it moments ago. He lifted it, hearing only the hum of a dead line. Then, a click. A second phone in the archive had been picked up. Poirot's lips curled into a grim smile. He replaced the receiver and moved toward Miss Harper's office, his steps silent on the carpet. The office door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Poirot saw Miss Harper pacing, her face pale, her hands trembling. As she clutched a letter, she muttered to herself, her words indistinct but urgent. Poirot knocked lightly, and she started, shoving the letter into a drawer. "Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed, her voice pitched a high. "I didn't expect you back so soon. Pardonnez-moi, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone smooth as velvet. "I wish to inquire about the cataloging of certain manuscripts. I have found something." Most curious, he watched her closely, noting the flicker of panic in her eyes. "Oh? What might that be?" she asked, forcing a smile. "A manuscript? The Vanishing Muse. It is not listed in your catalogue, yet it bears annotations of great interest. Perhaps you know of it." Her smile faltered. I'm not familiar with that title. The archive contains many uncatalogued items. Perhaps it was overlooked. Poirot's tone was gentle, but his eyes were sharp, or deliberately hidden. "Non, I find it curious, mademoiselle, that you seem so unsettled." Miss Harper's hands twisted together. "I'm merely tired, Monsieur Poirot. The archive is a demanding responsibility." "Yes, sir," Poirot said, inclining his head. "But responsibilities, they sometimes conceal secrets, do they not?" He let the question hang, watching her squirm. Before she could respond, the telephone rang again, its jarring tone making her jump. She reached for it, but Poirot was faster, lifting the receiver with a flourish. "Allah," he said, his voice crisp. A low, distorted voice replied, its words chilling. "Stop your search, Poirot. The treasure is not yours to find. Leave Devon, or the consequences will be dire." The line went dead. Poirot replaced the receiver slowly, his mind racing. The voice was unfamiliar, its accent unplaceable, but its intent was clear. Someone, perhaps Miss Harper, perhaps another, wanted him gone. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "A most interesting call, mademoiselle. It seems I am not the only one interested in the Vanishing Muse." Miss Harper's face drained of color. I don't know what you mean," she stammered. Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. Non, mademoiselle, do not insult the intelligence of Hercule Poirot. I will continue my investigation, and I will uncover the truth. Au revoir." He turned on his heel, leaving her trembling in her office. Outside, the Devon air was crisp, the sky bruised with the promise of rain. Poirot walked briskly to his lodgings, the manuscript heavy in his satchel. The warning call echoed in his mind, but it only strengthened his resolve. The Vanishing Muse was the key, its annotated pages a map to Christie's secret treasure. Whoever the scribe was, Dr. Vance or another, their legacy was within his grasp. He would not be deterred, not by threats, not by shadows, not by the nervous curator who knew more than she admitted. That evening, in the quiet of his room at the Devon Inn, Poirot pored over the manuscript. Its story was gripping, a tale of deception and discovery, but the annotations were the true prize. They referenced a final clue in London, hidden in a place tied to Christie's past. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The trail was clear. The next step inevitable. He would take the train to London, confront the publisher who knew Christie and Vance, and unravel the mystery of the eternal quill. As he closed the manuscript, a gust of wind rattled the window, and for a moment, he thought, he saw a figure in the street below, watching. He smiled grimly. Let them watch. Hercule Poirot was not a man to be frightened by shadows. Chapter 8. The train to London. Hercule Poirot adjusted his immaculate Homburg hat, the brim casting a sharp shadow across his meticulously groomed mustache as he stepped onto the platform of the quaint Devon railway station. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of coal smoke and dew-soaked grass. The station, a modest affair with a single ticket booth and a weathered bench, buzzed with the subdued excitement of early travelers. Poirot's polished shoes clicked against the cobblestones as he approached the ticket counter, his mind already turning over the puzzle of the hidden treasure hinted at in Agatha Christie's papers. "Unbillet pour laundress, s'il vous plaît," he said to the ticket clerk, a young man with a distracted air, who barely looked up from his ledger. Poirot's French accent, though softened by years in England, lent his words a certain elegance. The clerk slid a ticket across the counter, and Poirot tucked it into his waistcoat pocket, his gloved fingers brushing against the worn leather of Dr. Leonard Vance's notebook, which he had secured at his narrow escape from the Historical Society's basement. The notebook, filled with cryptic references to a literary treasure, was his latest clue in the chase for Agatha Christie's secretive chase that had already proven perilous. The platform was alive with the hum of anticipation. A mother scolded her child for chasing a pigeon, while a portly gentleman in a tweed suit grumbled about the train's delay. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the crowd, alert for any sign of the unseen watcher who had orchestrated the falling bookcase in Mr. Grayson's shop. The incident had left him wary, his instincts honed to detect the slightest irregularity. He had no proof, but he felt the weight of unseen eyes, a sensation that prickled the back of his neck. The train's whistle pierced the air, and a plume of steam announced the arrival of the 8:15 express to London. The locomotive, a gleaming beast of black iron and brass, hissed as it settled into place. Poirot boarded the first-class carriage, selecting a window seat in a compartment occupied only by an elderly woman knitting a scarf the color of ripe plums. She glanced up, her eyes twinkling with mild curiosity, then returned to her needles, which clicked rhythmically like a metronome. "Bonjour, madame," Poirot said, tipping his hat. She nodded politely, but offered no conversation, which suited him perfectly. He opened Vance's notebook, its pages yellowed and brittle, and reviewed the annotations he had deciphered. References to a literary masterpiece and a golden key danced through the text, but one name stood out: Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, a retired publisher who had worked with Agatha Christie in the 1920s. If anyone knew of Dr. Vance and his connection to Christie's secret, it was Hawthorne. Poirot had arranged to meet him in London, hoping the old man's memories would illuminate the trail. As the train lurched forward, the Devon countryside unfolded outside the window, rolling hills dappled with grazing sheep, hedgerows bursting with late summer blooms. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the compartment door sliding open. A man entered, his appearance striking yet disheveled. A navy overcoat, slyly rumpled, hung over a lean frame, and his dark hair was swept back in a manner that suggested haste rather than style. His eyes, a piercing gray, flicked toward Poirot, before settling on the empty seat opposite. "Mind if I join you?" the man asked, his voice carrying a faint trace of a northern accent. He didn't wait for an answer, tossing a leather satchel onto the overhead rack and settling into the seat with a casual air that Poirot found oddly calculated. "Not at all, monsieur," Poirot replied, his tone courteous but guarded. He closed the notebook, slipping it into his coat pocket. The man's presence set his instincts alight, not overtly threatening, but there was something in his quick glances, the way his fingers drummed on his knee, that suggested more than a casual traveler. "Name's Carter," the man said, offering a lopsided smile. "James Carter, heading to London for business." "You?" Poirot inclined his head, his expression inscrutable. "Hercule Poirot." "Also for business, of a sort." He offered no further details, his policy of discretion as firm as ever. Carter's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Poirot, eh? Sounds familiar. You a detective or something?" Carter's tone was light, but there was an edge to it, a probing quality that made Poirot's mustache twitch, something of that nature. Poirot said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "And you, Monsieur Carter, what business takes you to London?" "Oh, bit of this, bit of that," Carter replied, waving a hand vaguely. "Antiques, mostly, old books, rare manuscripts. You know, the sort of thing collectors go mad for." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Ever come across anything by Agatha Christie? She's got a following, you know. Some of her unpublished stuff, well, it's worth a fortune." Poirot's heart gave a small leap, but his face remained a mask of polite interest. "Agatha Christie, you say? A remarkable woman. Her works are indeed treasures. But unpublished manuscripts, that would be most intriguing." He paused, watching Carter closely. "You have an interest in such things?" Carter shrugged, but his nonchalance seemed forced. "Just rumors. Word is, she left behind some papers nobody's seen. Collectors like me, we hear things. Thought you might know, being a detective and all." Poirot's smile was thin, his eyes sharp as cut glass. "Rumors are like shadows, Monsieur Carter. They shift and vanish when one seeks to grasp them. But I shall keep your interest in mind." The conversation lapsed, and Poirot turned his attention to the window, though his mind was racing. Carter's mention of Christie's unpublished papers was too precise to be coincidence. Was he the stranger who had orchestrated the bookcase incident? Or was he another player in this increasingly complex game? Poirot's fingers brushed the notebook in his pocket, its weight a reminder of the stakes. The train rattled through a tunnel, plunging the compartment into momentary darkness. When the light returned, Poirot noticed Carter's satchel had slipped slightly, revealing a glimpse of a leather-bound book inside. The spine bore no title, but its worn edges suggested age and frequent handling. Poirot filed the observation away, his little gray cells already weaving connections. The elderly woman, still knitting, broke the silence. "You gentlemen and your mysteries," she said with a chuckle. "In my day, we read Christie for fun, not to chase her secrets, though I dare say she'd have loved knowing her work still stirs up trouble." Poirot turned to her, charmed by her candor. "Madame, you are most perceptive." Madame Christie, she had a gift for trouble, n'est-ce pas? But always with a solution at the end. She laughed softly, her needles never pausing. "Oh, she was clever, hid her clues in plain sight. You do well to remember that, Mr. Poirot." Her words lingered in Poirot's mind as the train sped on. Clues in plain sight, a principle he had long admired in Christie's work. Perhaps the notebook, the golden key, the map, all were pieces of a puzzle designed to be both obvious and elusive. He resolved to study the notebook again once he was alone. The journey continued uneventfully until the train slowed for a stop at a small station halfway to London. Carter stood, stretching. "Need a bit of air," he said, grabbing his satchel. Back in a tick, he slid the compartment door open and stepped into the corridor, leaving Poirot alone with the knitting woman. The moment Carter was out of sight, Poirot's instincts flared. The satchel, there was something about it, something that demanded investigation. He glanced at the woman, who was engrossed in her scarf, and rose quietly. The satchel hung just within reach on the rack. With a swift, practiced motion, he nudged it open, revealing the leather-bound book he had glimpsed earlier. Its cover was embossed with a faint symbol crossed with a key. Poirot's pulse quickened. It was too specific, too aligned with the clues he had uncovered. He opened the book, careful not to disturb its position. Inside, he found pages filled with handwritten notes, not unlike Vance's notebook, but these were in a different hand, neater, more deliberate. One page caught his eye, a sketch of a golden key, identical to the one he had found in the candlestick, accompanied by a single word, "Scribe." Before he could read further, he heard footsteps in the corridor. Poirot closed the book and returned it to the satchel, resuming his seat just as Carter re-entered. The man's eyes flicked to the satchel, then to Poirot, who met his gaze with an innocent smile, A fine day for travel, non? Poirot said, his voice light. Carter nodded, but his expression was guarded. Fine enough, he sat, his fingers tapping restlessly. Poirot sensed the man's unease, a confirmation that the satchel held secrets Carter did not wish to share. The train rolled on, and Poirot's mind churned. Carter was no mere antique stealer, the Quillan key symbol. The mention of Christie's papers, it was clear he was entangled in the same mystery. But was he a rival, a thief, or something more dangerous? Poirot decided to test him. Monsieur Carter, he began, his tone conversational, you spoke of collectors. Have you ever heard of a scholar named Leonard Vance, a man with a passion for Christie's work? I am told. Carter's fingers froze mid-tap. For a fraction of a second, his face betrayed a flicker of recognition, quickly masked. Vance, can't say I have. Scholars aren't my crowd. Why do you ask? Poirot shrugged, his eyes never leaving Carter's. A name I heard in passing. I thought, perhaps, a man of your interests might know of him. No matter. The lie was subtle, but Poirot saw its effect. Carter's jaw tightened, and he shifted in his seat, his earlier ease replaced by a coiled tension. Poirot's suspicion hardened. Carter knew of Vance, and likely of the treasure. The question was, what was his role? The train's rhythm changed, slowing as it approached another station. Carter stood abruptly, grabbing his satchel. Forgot something, he muttered, and before Poirot could respond, he lunged forward, his hand darting toward Poirot's coat pocket, the pocket holding Vance's notebook. Poirot's reflexes, honed by years of outwitting adversaries, were swift. He seized Carter's wrist, twisting it just enough to force a gasp. Monsieur Carter, he said, his voice slow and steely, it is most impolite to take what does not belong to you. Carter wrenched his arm free, his face flushed with anger and surprise. You don't know what you're meddling in, Poirot, he hissed. Walk away, or you'll regret it. Before Poirot could reply, Carter bolted from the compartment, the satchel clutched to his chest. Poirot sprang to his feet, ignoring the startled gasp of the knitting woman, and gave chase. The corridor was narrow, crowded with passengers boarding. At the station, Carter's navy coat flashed ahead, weaving through the throng. Poirot pursued, his small stature belying his agility. He dodged a porter's trolley, his eyes locked on Carter's retreating figure. The man reached the end of the carriage and leapt onto the platform, disappearing into the crowd. Poirot followed, his heart pounding not with exertion, but with the thrill of the hunt. The station was a chaos of steam and shouting. Poirot scanned the crowd, spotting Carter's coat near a newspaper stand. He moved swiftly, his cane tapping, a determined rhythm. As he closed the distance, Carter turned, his eyes widening in panic. He shoved past a group of travelers, knocking over a suitcase, and sprinted toward the station's exit. Poirot, undeterred, navigated the obstacle with grace, his mind racing. Carter was desperate, which meant he was close to something or someone. Poirot reached the exit just in time to see Carter climb into a waiting taxi, the vehicle speeding off before Poirot could hail another. Breathing heavily, Poirot stood on the curb, his mind already shifting to the next move. Carter's attempt to steal the notebook confirmed its importance, and his flight suggested he feared exposure. Poirot hailed a taxi of his own, directing the driver to the address of Reginald Hawthorne, the retired publisher. The chase was far from over. The journey to London resumed, this time by road. Poirot arrived at Hawthorne's office, a modest building in Bloomsbury lined with bookshelves that smelled of old paper and ink. Hawthorne, a frail man in his late 70s with a shock of white hair, greeted Poirot with a warm but weary smile. Mr. Poirot, a pleasure, Hawthorne said, gesturing to a chair. I've heard of your reputation. What brings you to an old publisher's doorstep? Poirot settled into the chair, his demeanor calm but purposeful. Monsieur Hawthorne, I am investigating a matter concerning Agatha Christie and a scholar named Leonard Vance. I believe you knew them both. I seek the truth about a literary masterpiece they may have concealed. Hawthorne's eyes widened, a spark of memory igniting. Vance. Yes, a brilliant man, obsessed with Christie's work. He came to me in 29, convinced she'd hidden a manuscript, a novel unlike anything she'd written. He called it her great secret, said it could change how stories are told. I thought him fanciful, but, he paused, his gaze distant. There was something in his eyes, a certainty. And Agatha, she never denied it outright, always smiled that cryptic smile of hers. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. Did Vance ever speak of a treasure, monsieur, or of a scribe? Hawthorne frowned, rubbing his chin. The scribe? No, but he mentioned a group, a sort of literary circle, he hinted. They were guarding something, but he was cagey, then he vanished. Some said he'd gone abroad, others that he'd met with an accident. I never knew what to believe. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing every detail. And the manuscript? Do you know where it might be? Hawthorne shook his head. If it exists, it's hidden well. Agatha was a master of secrets. Check her papers, her letters. She loved her riddles. The interview ended with Poirot thanking Hawthorne, his mind buzzing with new connections. The manuscript, the scribe, the literary circle, it was all coming together. But Carter's interference suggested the trail was fraught with danger. As Poirot stepped onto the street, he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see Carter's navy coat in the crowd. And there, across the road, he saw a fleeting glimpse of the man, watching from beside a lamppost before vanishing. Into an alley, Poirot's lips curved into a determined smile. The game was on, and Hercule Poirot was not one to lose. Chapter 9. The coded correspondence. Poirot sat at the small, polished desk in his room at the Rose and Crown Inn, the faint scent of lavender polish mingling with the crisp Devon air drifting through the open window. The room, with its low-beam ceiling and chintz curtains, was a quaint retreat from the whirlwind of clues and dangers that had pursued him since his arrival in the village. Yet, even here, the mystery of Agatha Christie's hidden treasure pulsed like a heartbeat, demanding his attention. His gray cells, as he liked to call them, were alight with the challenge of the coded letters he had discovered in the archive. Letters that promised to lead him closer to the enigmatic literary treasure hinted at by Dr. Leonard Vance and Christie herself. The letters, tucked into a faded leather folder in the archive's deepest recesses, had been a revelation. Poirot had found them late the previous evening, hidden behind a false panel in a bookshelf, as if Christie herself had intended them to remain unseen by all but the most determined seeker. The folder contained a series of correspondence between Christie and Vance, written in a curious cipher that had taken Poirot hours to unravel. The code, a sophisticated substitution cipher interwoven with literary references, had yielded its secrets only after Poirot cross-referenced it with passages from Christie's own novels. The result was a tantalizing glimpse into a plan to conceal, a manuscript, one that could, in Vance's words, change the world of literature. Now, as the morning sun cast long shadows across the room, Poirot spread the decoded letters before him, their contents a mosaic of intrigue. The first letter, dated 1948, was from Christie to Vance. My dear Leonard, the project is nearly complete, but I fear its power. The quill, as we have come to call it, must remain hidden until the world is ready. I have devised a final clue, one that only a mind as keen as yours could follow. Seek it where my childhood dreams took root, where stories were born in the quiet of the night. Yours in secrecy, a CTHE. Second letter, from Vance, was more cryptic. Agatha, the Society agrees the quill must be protected. I have placed the key in a place of light and shadow, where time stands still, but I grow uneasy. There are those who would claim it for greed, not art. Guard your steps, and trust no 1.L.V. The third and final letter, again from Christie, was the most revealing yet. Leonard, the final clue lies in the heart of my youth, in the walls that heard my first tales. The quill is safe, but only if the path remains unbroken. The golden key is but the first step. The true treasure awaits in a vault of words. I pray you are right about its destiny. C. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The references to childhood dreams and the heart of my youth pointed unmistakably to Christie's childhood home, Ashfield, in Torquay. The vault of words suggested a literary hiding place, perhaps a library or a secret compartment within the house, but the mention of a society and the warnings of greed hinted at a larger conspiracy, one that might explain the shadowy figure who had tried to steal Vance's notebook on the train to London. And now, as Poirot prepared to visit Ashfield, a new disturbance gnawed at his senses. His hotel room had been searched. It had been subtle, almost imperceptible, but Poirot's fastidious nature missed nothing. The angle of his suitcase, the slight crease in the rug, the faint smudge on the mirror all betrayed the presence of an intruder. Someone was watching him, someone who knew he was closing in on the truth. The question was, who? Miss Evelyn Harper, the archives curator, with her guarded demeanor. The nervous bookseller, Mr. Grayson, who had narrowly escaped Poirot's scrutiny after the falling bookcase, or perhaps Lord Ashby, the elusive collector the publisher in London had mentioned, whose obsession with rare manuscripts bordered on mania. Poirot decided to act if the intruder believed they could intimidate Hercule Poirot. They were gravely mistaken. He would set a trap, one that would reveal the culprit without endangering his progress. He began by rearranging the room to his advantage. He placed a single hair across the clasp of his suitcase, a trick as old as detection itself, but effective. He scattered a fine layer of talcum powder near the window, where the intruder had likely entered, ensuring any footprints would betray their return. Finally, he left a decoy, a folded piece of paper marked "Clue to the Quill," on the desk, its contents deliberately vague but enticing enough to draw attention. Satisfied, Poirot donned his overcoat and hat, his mustache impeccably waxed. Despite the early hour, he slipped the decoded letters into a hidden pocket sewn into the lining of his coat, a precaution against further theft. As he stepped into the inn's cozy dining room for breakfast, he scanned the faces of the other guests. A ruddy-faced farmer sipped tea in the corner, a young couple whispered over toast, and a bespectacled woman in a tweed suit scribbled in a notebook. None seemed out of place, yet Poirot's instincts told him danger was near. "Bonjour, monsieur," Poirot called Mrs. Tuttle, the inn's cheerful proprietress, bustling over with a pot of tea. "You're up early, off to solve another mystery, I wager." Poirot smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Madame, the mysteries, they find me, gnawing. But today, I seek only the history of this charming village." Mrs. Tuttle laughed, oblivious to the weight of his words. "Well, if it's history you want, Ashfield's the place. Miss Christie's old home. You know, they say it's full of secrets, though no one's lived there in years." "Secrets, you say?" Poirot's tone was light, but his mind seized on the confirmation. "Perhaps I shall visit this Ashfield. It may hold inspiration." As he sipped his tea, Poirot's thoughts raced. Ashfield was the next logical step, but he could not go unprepared. The letters suggested a vault of words, and Vance's notebook, now safely tucked away, had mentioned a place of light and shadow. These clues, combined with the intruder's audacity, meant time was short. He resolved to visit Ashfield that afternoon, but first he would check his trap. Returning to his room after breakfast, Poirot's heart quickened. The hair on the suitcase was gone, the talcum powder disturbed by a single set of footprints, small, precise, suggesting a cautious intruder. The decoy paper was untouched, a sign the intruder had been interrupted or was too clever to take the bait. Poirot examined the footprints closely, noting the faint tread of a woman's shoe. Miss Harper, or another player in this intricate game. He wasted no time. Locking the room, he hailed a taxi to Ashfield, a rambling Victorian house on the outskirts of Torquay. The journey was short, but the road wound through mist-shrouded lanes, the sea glimmering faintly in the distance. Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the puzzle. The society mentioned in the letters intrigued him most. Was it a group of literary guardians, as Vance seemed to imply, or something more sinister? And why had Vance vanished after his correspondence with Christie? The answers, Poirot felt certain, lay within Ashfield's walls. The house loomed before him, its ivy-clad facade weathered but grand. The garden was overgrown, its roses choked by weeds, yet there was a quiet dignity to the place, as if it held its secrets with pride. Poirot approached the front door, which was locked, as expected. A caretaker, a grizzled man named Mr. Penrose, emerged from a side path, eyeing Poirot with suspicion. "Who are you, then?" Penrose demanded, his Devon accent thick. "This ain't a place for tourists." Poirot bowed slightly, his charm disarming. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot, at your service. I am a scholar of Madame Christie's work, and I seek to pay my respects to her childhood home. May I enter?" Penrose hesitated, but Poirot's reputation preceded him. Grumbling, the caretaker unlocked the door, muttering about nosy foreigners. Inside, the house was a time capsule, its furniture draped in dust sheets, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and memories. Poirot's eyes scanned the whole way, noting a grand staircase and a door leading to what he deduced was the library, the vault of words. "May I see the library, Monsieur Penrose?" Poirot asked, his tone polite but firm. Penrose shrugged. "Suit yourself. Ain't much to see but books and cobwebs." The library was a treasure trove of faded grandeur, shelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with volumes of Dickens, Brontë, and Conan Doyle, alongside Christie's own early works. Poirot's gaze fell on a carved oak panel behind the desk, its intricate design catching the light in a way that seemed deliberate. "A place of light and shadow," he murmured, recalling Vance's words. He ran his fingers along the panel, feeling for irregularities. A faint click rewarded his efforts, and the panel swung open, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a leather-bound diary, its lock engraved with a quill motif. Poirot's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary diary, was the key to the next clue. Using a hairpin from his pocket, a tool he carried for such occasions, Poirot deftly picked the lock. The diary opened to reveal Christie's elegant handwriting, interspersed with sketches of quills and cryptic phrases. One entry, dated 1950, stood out. "The quill is hidden where the world cannot see, in a vault guarded by the Society's oath. The key lies in the heart of the tale, where the hero triumphs over shadow. Leonard, you alone know the truth. Protect it, as I have." Poirot's mind raced. The vault was literal, perhaps a safe for a hidden room, but the reference to the heart of the tale suggested a literary connection. Was the manuscript itself the vault, its pages containing the final clue? Before he could ponder further, a shadow moved in the doorway. He turned to see Mr. Grayson, the bookseller, his face pale but resolute. "You're getting too close, monsieur." "Poirot," Grayson said, his voice trembling. "You don't know what you're meddling with." Poirot remained calm, his hand resting lightly on the diary. "And you, Monsieur Grayson, are far from the innocent bookseller you pretend to be. For whom do you work, Lord Ashby, or this society?" Grayson's eyes darted nervously. I'm just a messenger. They'll kill me if I talk. But you're in over your head. Leave the diary and walk away." Poirot smiled thinly. "Hercule Poirot does not walk away, monsieur. Tell me, who are they?" Grayson hesitated, then bolted for the door. Poirot, surprisingly agile, caught him by the arm, his grip firm. "Speak, or I shall ensure the authorities take an interest in your little shop." Grayson's resolve crumbled. "It's Ashby," he whispered. "He's obsessed with Christie's manuscripts. He hired me to watch you, to make sure you didn't find the quill. But there's more. A group, old as time, guarding something bigger. I don't know what. I swear." Poirot released him, his mind whirling. Lord Ashby was a collector? Yes, but this group suggested a deeper conspiracy. Perhaps the society mentioned in the letters. He tucked the diary into his coat, dismissing Grayson with a wave. Go, monsieur. But know that Poirot sees all. As Grayson fled, Poirot returned to the inn, the diary burning a metaphorical hole in his pocket. The trap he had set earlier yielded no further clues, but the footprints and Grayson's confession confirmed his suspicions. He was being hunted. Ashfield had given him the diary, but the true treasure, the manuscript called the Eternal Quill, remained elusive. The vault of words awaited, and Poirot knew his next step would take him back to London, to a vault that might hold the key to Christie's greatest secret. As he boarded the evening train, the Devon countryside fading into dusk, Poirot felt a thrill of anticipation. The game was afoot, and Hercule Poirot was ready to play. Chapter 10. The childhood hometh morning sun cast a golden haze over the rolling hills of Devon, its rays filtering through the ancient oaks that lined the winding road to Ashworthy. Agatha Christie's childhood home, Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit despite the rural setting, adjusted his Homburg hat as he stepped from the chauffeured car. The air carried the scent of damp earth and blooming honeysuckle, a stark contrast to the musty archive he'd left behind in Torquay. His polished shoes crunched against the gravel path leading to the Georgian manor, its ivy-clad walls whispering secrets of a bygone era. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, trailed behind, his brow furrowed with a mix of curiosity and unease. Poirot, are you certain this is wise? Hastings asked, his voice low as they approached the wrought iron gate that coded correspondence. You found those letters between Christie and Vance mentioned a final clue here. But what if it's a trap? Someone's been rummaging through your hotel room. After all, Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. Mon ami, a trap is only dangerous if one steps into it blindly. My little gray cells, they are alert, and they see the threads of this mystery weaving together. The childhood home of Madame Christie holds the key, perhaps literally, to the treasure we seek. And as for the intruder, he tapped his temple. They have revealed their desperation, and that is to our advantage. The gate creaked as Poirot pushed it open, revealing a sprawling lawn dotted with rose bushes and a crumbling stone fountain. Ashworthy was no longer the vibrant family home it had been in Christie's youth. Its windows were dark, its shutters weathered, yet there was a quiet dignity to the place, as if it, too, guarded the secrets of its former mistress. Poirot's eye scanned the facade, noting the asymmetry of the upper windows, a detail that struck him as deliberate, though he could not yet say why. The caretaker, a wiry man named Mr. Timmins, greeted them at the door. His face, lined with years of solitary stewardship, betrayed a flicker of suspicion as he eyed Poirot's meticulous appearance. You're the detective, then, come about Miss Christie's things? He asked, his Devon accent thick. Oui, precisely, Poirot replied, his tone smooth as velvet. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We have permission from the estate to examine certain artifacts within the house. You will assist us, n'est-ce pas? Timmins grunted, stepping aside to let them enter. The foyer was a time capsule, polished oak floors, a grand staircase spiraling upward, and walls adorned with faded portraits of the Christie family. A chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled by dust. Poirot's gaze lingered on a portrait of a young Agatha, her eyes bright with the spark of a mind that would one day craft masterpieces of deception. Mr. Timmins, Poirot began, you have been caretaker here for many years. Yes. Have you ever noticed anything unusual, objects out of place, visitors who seemed overly curious? Timmins scratched his stubbled chin, his eyes narrowing. Can't say I have. Folk come to pay respects, scholars mostly, poking about for Miss Christie's old scribbles, but nothing odd. Why do you ask? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Curiosity. Monsieur, it is the detective's curse. He gestured toward the staircase. May we begin with the library? I understand it was a favorite room of Madame Christie. Timmins led them through a corridor lined with bookshelves, their shelves sagging under the weight of leather-bound tomes. The library itself was a cavernous room, its high ceilings lost in shadow. A massive mahogany desk dominated one end, flanked by tall windows that overlooked the garden. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with books, journals, and curios mementos of a life steeped in stories. Poirot's fingers brushed the edge of a shelf, his eyes darting from one detail to another: a chipped porcelain figurine, a tarnished brass inkstand, a row of novels arranged out of alphabetical order. "Hastings," Poirot said softly, "observe the books. They are not as they seem. The spines some are worn, others pristine. And yet, they are not arranged by author or subject. There is a pattern here, one that Madame Christie intended for us to find." Hastings frowned, peering at the shelves. "You think she hid something in the books, like that journal you found in the archive?" "Perhaps," Poirot mused. "But the letters we decoded spoke of a final clue in this house, and the library is the heart of a writer's soul. We must look for what does not belong." As Timmins hovered near the door, Poirot began inspecting the shelves, his gloved hands moving with precision. He pulled out a copy of The Hound of the Baskervilles, its spine creased from use, and flipped through its pages. Nothing. Next, he examined a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets, its cover pristine. A faint rustle caught his ear as he opened it. A single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, slipped to the floor. Poirot knelt to retrieve it, his eyes gleaming. The paper bore a sketch of the library, with an arrow pointing to a specific panel on the far wall. Below the sketch was a single line in Christie's unmistakable hand: "The quill guards the truth." "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. "Hastings, we have found it. The final clue." He crossed the room to the indicated panel, a carved oak square depicting a scene of cherubs reading scrolls. His fingers traced the edges, searching for a seam. With a gentle press, the panel clicked and swung inward, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside lay a small, leather-bound diary, its cover embossed with a quill and inkpot. A tiny brass lock secured it. Hastings leaned closer, his breath catching. "Is that it, Poirot? The treasure?" "Not the treasure itself, mon ami, but the path to it," Poirot replied. He turned to Timmins, who watched from the doorway with an unreadable expression. "Monsieur Timmins, do you have a key for such a lock?" Timmins shook his head, his voice gruff. "Never seen that diary before." "No key here." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Instead, he slipped the diary into his coat pocket. "Very well, we shall continue our search elsewhere." "Merci, monsieur." As they stepped into the corridor, Hastings whispered, "Do you trust him?" He seemed awfully quick to deny knowing about that diary. "Trust, Hastings, is a luxury we cannot afford," Poirot said. "But I suspect Monsieur Timmins knows more than he admits. For now, we must focus on the diary, the clue in the letters. The quill's shadow points the way, suggests the key may be near." They returned to the library, where Poirot examined the desk more closely. His fingers brushed a quill pen resting in its stand, its feather slightly askew. He lifted it, revealing a faint indentation in the wood beneath. With a gentle twist, the base of the inkstand popped open, revealing a tiny brass key. "Voila," Poirot said, holding it up. "The quill guards the truth." Indeed, back in the privacy of the corridor, Poirot unlocked the diary. Its pages were filled with Christie's neat script, detailing her collaboration with Dr. Leonard Vance and a secret society of writers known as the Order of the Quill. The society, she wrote, was dedicated to preserving illusionary literary works, and Vance had been its keeper. One entry stood out: "The Eternal Quill is not merely a manuscript, but a new way of seeing the world through story. Leonard fears its power, but I believe it must be protected. The final hiding place is known only to the Order, and the key lies in the heart of my stories." Poirot's eyes sparkled with realization. "The Eternal Quill, this is the treasure, Hastings. A manuscript that redefines storytelling itself. But where is it hidden, the heart of her stories?" "Perhaps a reference to her most famous works." Before Hastings could respond, a shadow flickered at the end of the corridor. Poirot's hand shot up, silencing his friend. The faint creak of a floorboard betrayed the presence of another. Poirot motioned for Hastings to follow as he crept toward the sound, his cane held like a weapon. They rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with Mr. Grayson, the nervous bookseller from the village. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. In his hand was a small flashlight, its beam trembling against the wall. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You have been following me. Nong. First the bookcase in your shop, now here. Explain yourself." Grayson's shoulders slumped, his flashlight clattering to the floor. "I didn't mean no harm, Mr. Poirot," he stammered. "I was hired, see, by a collector. He wants whatever you're after, said it's worth a fortune. I was just to watch you. Report back." Poirot's mustache quivered with indignation. "A collector, you say? And who is this person who employs you to spy on Hercule Poirot?" Grayson swallowed hard. "Lord Ashby. Lives up at the manor on the hill. He's mad for anything of Miss Christie's. Paid me to keep an eye on the archive, the village, and now you." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "Lord Ashby," he murmured. "A name we have not yet encountered, but one that fits the pattern of greed. Monsieur Grayson, you will tell me everything you know about this collector, or I shall ensure the local constabulary takes a keen interest in your activities." Grayson spilled his story in a rush. Lord Ashby was a reclusive aristocrat with a private library of rare manuscripts. He'd heard rumors of Christie's hidden treasure and believed it to be a lost masterpiece. Grayson had been tasked with monitoring anyone who came too close to the truth, including Poirot. The bookseller swore he meant no harm, only needed the money. Poirot studied him, his eyes piercing. "You are fortunate, monsieur, that I believe in second chances. Go back to your shop and speak of this to no one. If you betray me again, you will find Hercule Poirot less forgiving." Grayson nodded frantically and fled into the dusk. Hastings let out a low whistle. "That was close, Poirot. Do you think Ashby's the one behind the hotel room search?" "I almost certainly," Poirot replied, tapping the diary against his palm. "But we have the advantage now. The diary points us to the Order of the Quill, and Lord Ashby's involvement confirms the treasure's value. We must proceed with caution, Hastings, for the game has become most dangerous." As they stepped out into the twilight, the silhouette of Ashworthy loomed behind them, its secrets only partially unveiled. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the clues, the coded letters, the diary, the mysterious order. The eternal quill was within reach, but so were those who would stop at nothing to claim it. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice resolute. "We must prepare for our next move. Lord Ashby awaits, and I suspect he will not welcome Hercule Poirot with open arms." The chapter drew to a close as the two men walked into the gathering dusk, the diary tucked safely in Poirot's coat, a beacon guiding them toward the heart of Agatha Christie's greatest mystery. Chapter 11. The collector's game. The moon hung low over the Devon countryside, casting a silver sheen across the rolling hills as Hercule Poirot's taxi wound its way toward Ashby Manor. The estate loomed at the edge of a dense wood, its Gothic spires piercing the night sky like the claws of some ancient beast. Poirot, seated in the back of the taxi, adjusted his gloves, his green eyes sharp with anticipation. The trail of Agatha Christie's hidden treasure had led him here, to the lair of Lord Randolph Ashby, a reclusive collector whose obsession with rare manuscripts was matched only by his reputation for ruthlessness. Poirot's investigation had taken a dramatic turn after confronting Mr. Grayson, the nervous bookseller from Ashfield Village. Under Poirot's relentless questioning, Grayson had confessed to working for Ashby, tasked with monitoring the Greenway archive and reporting any unusual inquiries. The bookseller's fear had been palpable, his hands trembling as he spoke of Ashby's uncompromising nature. "He'll stop at nothing to get what he wants," Grayson had whispered, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Ashby's shadow to materialize. The confession had given Poirot a name, a motive, and a destination. Ashby Manor, where the next piece of the puzzle waited. The taxi halted at the manor's wrought iron gates, flanked by stone lions weathered by time. Poirot paid the driver, adding a generous tip with a murmured, "For your discretion, mon ami." The driver, a taciturn man with a face like crumpled leather, nodded and sped off, leaving Poirot alone in the chill night air. The gates were locked, but a small side entrance, half hidden by ivy, stood ajar. Careless oversight or a deliberate invitation, Poirot's mustache twitched. He preferred to assume the latter. Slipping through the entrance, he moved with the stealth of a cat, his polished shoes silent on the gravel path. The manor's grounds were a labyrinth of overgrown hedges and statues, their faces eroded into eerie anonymity. Poirot's heart beat steadily, his senses alert. Grayson's warning echoed in his mind. Ashby was no mere collector, but a man who played games with power, and Poirot was now a piece on his board. The manor's entrance was a towering oak door, its brass knocker shaped like a quill, a detail that sent a shiver of recognition through Poirot. Was this a nod to the cryptic note he'd found in the Greenway archive, with its references to quills and ink? He knocked, the sound reverberating through the silent house. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a butler whose gaunt frame and hollow eyes suggested he had seen more than he cared to tell. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot," Poirot announced, presenting his card with a flourish. "I am here to speak with Lord Ashby on a matter of literary importance." The butler's gaze flickered over the card, his expression unreadable. "His lordship is not expecting visitors," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "But he is curious about uninvited guests. Follow me." Poirot was led through a grand hall lined with portraits, their subjects staring down with cold, aristocratic disdain. The air smelled of old leather and wax, and every surface gleamed with the obsessive care of a man who valued possessions above people. The butler ushered Poirot into a library that took his breath away. Shelves soared to the ceiling, filled with rare books and manuscripts, their spines glowing in the firelight. At the room's center stood a massive desk, behind which sat Lord Randolph Ashby. Ashby was a man of contradictions, his face youthful yet lined with calculation, his eyes bright with intellect but shadowed by greed. He wore a velvet smoking jacket, an affectation that seemed both theatrical and menacing. A glass of brandy rested at his elbow, untouched, as if he preferred the appearance of indulgence to the act itself. "Monsieur Poirot," Ashby said, his voice smooth as polished marble, "your reputation as a detective is matched only by your audacity. To what do I owe this intrusion?" Poirot bowed slightly, his smile disarming. "Monseigneur, I am a man who seeks truth, and I believe you hold a piece of it, a manuscript, perhaps, by Madame Agatha Christie, a treasure hidden in her papers. I understand you have an interest in such things." Ashby's eyes narrowed, but his lips curved into a faint smile. "You're bold, I'll give you that. But you're mistaken if you think I'd share my collection with a stranger. My manuscripts are my life's work, each one a jewel in my crown. Why should I entertain your theories?" Poirot seated himself uninvited, crossing his legs with deliberate ease. "Because, Monseigneur, I suspect you already know of the treasure I seek. A manuscript, perhaps the eternal quill, hidden by Christie herself. And I believe you have gone to great lengths to acquire it, lengths that include employing Monsieur Grayson to spy on the Greenway archive." The accusation hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Ashby's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, leaning back in his chair. "Grayson, a small man with small ambitions. If he spoke of me, he spoke out of turn. But let us be frank, Monsieur Poirot, you're chasing a myth. Christie's papers are a maze of scribbles, nothing more. If there were a treasure, I'd have found it by now." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, you have not. Perhaps because the treasure requires a mind attuned to subtlety, not merely acquisition. Tell me, have you ever come across a manuscript in your collection that does not belong, a forgery, perhaps, masquerading as Christie's work?" Ashby's fingers tightened around his brandy glass, a telltale sign. "A forgery? Preposterous. Every item in my collection is authenticated. Vraiment, Poirot said, his tone light but piercing. Then you will not mind if I examine one such item. A manuscript, say, from the 1940s, acquired from a source in Torquay. The room seemed to grow colder, the fire's crackle the only sound. Ashby's composure wavered, and for a moment, Poirot saw the predator beneath the aristocrat's veneer. You tread dangerous ground, monsieur, Ashby said softly. My collection is private, and I protect what is mine. Poirot rose, undaunted. As do I, monseigneur. I protect the truth, and I shall find it, with or without your cooperation. Ashby stood, his height imposing. Very well, if you insist on playing this game, I'll indulge you. Follow me. He led Poirot through a hidden door behind a bookcase, a cliché that none the less thrilled Poirot's sense of drama. The passage descended into a vault, its walls lined with glass cases displaying manuscripts like trophies. The air was dry, sterile, the hum of a climate control system the only sound. Ashby stopped before a case containing a single manuscript, its pages yellowed but pristine, bound in leather. The title page read, The Vanishing Muse, by Agatha Christie. Poirot's heart quickened. This was the manuscript he found referenced in the Greenway Archive, annotated by Dr. Leonard Vance, but as he examined it, his trained eye caught discrepancies. The ink was too uniform, the handwriting too precise, lacking Christie's characteristic flourishes. This, he said, is a forgery. A skillful one, but a forgery nonetheless. Ashby's laugh was cold. You're mistaken, Poirot. This is a prize of my collection, acquired at great cost. Cost, perhaps, Poirot replied, but not authenticity. The paper is modern, the binding too perfect. Madame Christie wrote with passion, not precision. This is the work of a craftsman, not a genius. Ashby's face darkened. You dare accuse me of fraud, in my own house. I accuse no one, Poirot said smoothly. I merely observe, and I observe that you are desperate to possess what you cannot have the true manuscript, the one hidden by Christie herself. Tell me, monseigneur, who supplied this forgery? Grayson, or another of your agents. Ashby's silence was answer. Enough. He stepped closer, his voice low. You're clever, Poirot, but clever men make enemies. Leave this matter alone, or you'll find yourself outmatched. Poirot's mustache twitched with amusement. Outmatched? Non, monseigneur. Hercule Poirot is never outmatched. But I thank you for this display. It has told me much. Before Ashby could respond, a distant crash echoed from the manor above, a window shattering, perhaps, or a door forced open. Ashby's head snapped toward the sound, and Poirot seized the moment. It seems you have other visitors, he said, slipping toward the vault's exit. I shall leave you to them. Ashby shouted for his guards, but Poirot was already moving, his small frame surprisingly agile. He navigated the passage, emerging into the library just as the burly men in dark coats burst through the main door. Stop him! Ashby's voice echoed from below. Poirot darted through the hall, his mind racing. The crash suggested in a light perhaps Captain Hastings, whom he'd asked to keep watch from the grounds, or a rival, another hunter of the treasure. Either way, it was his chance to escape. He slipped through a side door into the gardens, where the mist cloaked him like a conspirator. The guard's footsteps pounded behind, but Poirot knew the terrain from his earlier reconnaissance. He ducked behind a statue, then sprinted toward the woods, his heart pounding with exhilaration rather than fear. As he reached the tree line, a figure emerged from the shadows. Hastings, his face flushed with urgency. Poirot, thank heavens. I heard the crash, thought you were in trouble. Poirot clapped his friend's shoulder. Mon cher Hastings, your timing is impeccable, but we must move. Lord Ashby is not a man to forgive such an intrusion. They fled through the woods, the guard's shouts fading into the night. At a secluded crossroads, Poirot's prearranged taxi waited, its engine idling. As they sped toward Ashfield, Poirot leaned back, his mind alight with new insights. The forged manuscript confirmed that Ashby was a player in this game, but not the master. Someone else, perhaps the mysterious scribe or the secret society hinted at in Vance's notes, was pulling the strings. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice calm despite the chase, "we have stirred the hornet's nest, Nong, but in doing so, we have seen the truth. The treasure is real, and Ashby will not have it." Hastings, still catching his breath, grinned. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "But of course, mon ami. It is a game of minds, and Hercule Poirot plays to win." As the taxi carried them back to the safety of the village, Poirot's thoughts turned to the next move. The forged manuscript was a clue in itself, a decoy meant to mislead. The true eternal quill was still out there, hidden in the shadows of Christie's legacy, and Poirot would find it, no matter who stood in his way. Chapter 12. The secret société mist clung to the London streets like a conspirator's whisper as Hercule Poirot adjusted the brim of his borrowed scholar's cap, its tweed fabric itching against his meticulously combed hair. Disguised as Professor Émile Laurent, a fictitious literary historian from Brussels, he stood before the unassuming facade of the Elysian Club, a private establishment tucked in a quiet corner of Bloomsbury. His heart beat with the steady rhythm of anticipation, for tonight he would infiltrate a meeting of the secret society guarding Agatha Christie's fabled manuscript, the Eternal Quill. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked cobblestones, and the faint tang of coal smoke, a fitting backdrop for the intrigue that lay ahead. Poirot's investigation had led him here after weeks of unraveling clues hidden in Christie's papers, coded letters, and whispered village rumors. The trail had grown perilous, narrow escapes from falling bookcases, shadowy pursuers on trains, and cryptic warnings had marked his path. Yet each step had brought him closer to the truth. A literary treasure, a manuscript said to redefine storytelling itself, concealed by a clandestine group of writers who called themselves the Order of the Quill. Tonight, he would learn its location, or so he hoped, provided his disguise held. He smoothed his false beard, a masterful creation that altered his distinctive mustache into something more academic and nondescript, and adjusted the spectacles perched on his nose. His usual impeccable suit had been replaced with a slightly rumpled tweed jacket, complete with elbow patches, and a leather satchel slung over his shoulder contained forged credentials and a notebook filled with scholarly annotations. To the world, he was no longer Hercule Poirot, the renowned detective, but a pedantic professor obsessed with obscure literary manuscripts. The door of the Elysian Club was oak, weathered but sturdy, with a brass knocker shaped like a quill. Poirot rapped twice, the sound sharp in the stillness. A narrow slot slid open, revealing a pair of piercing eyes. "Name and purpose," a gruff voice demanded. "Professor Émile Laurent," Poirot replied, his voice tinged with a thicker Belgian accent than usual, laced with a touch of academic arrogance. "I am here for the symposium on lost literary works. I was invited by Dr. Mortimer." The eyes studied him, then the slot closed with a snap. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit foyer, a man in a black suit, his face, as expressionless as a tombstone, gestured for Poirot to enter. "Your credentials, Professor." Poirot handed over the forged documents, his heart steady despite the scrutiny. The man examined them, his fingers lingering on the embossed seal of a non-existent Brussels institute. Satisfied, he returned the papers and led Poirot down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women, their eyes seeming to follow him. The air grew warmer, scented with old books and wax polish, as they descended a spiral staircase to a lower chamber. The meeting room was a cavernous space, its walls draped in crimson velvet, illuminated by flickering gas lamps that cast long shadows. A dozen figures sat around a circular mahogany table, their faces partially obscured by hooded cloaks embroidered with a silver quill. At the head of the table stood a tall woman, her silver hair coiled in an elegant chignon, her eyes sharp and commanding. She wore no hood, her presence radiating authority. Poirot recognized her instantly from a photograph in Vance's notebook. Lady Beatrice Langley, a reclusive literary critic rumored to have known Christie personally. Welcome, Professor Laurent, Lady Beatrice said, her voice smooth but edged with steel. Your reputation precedes you. Please, take a seat. Poirot bowed slightly, his movements deliberate. I am honored, madame, he said, settling into a chair at the table's edge. His eyes scanned the room, noting the guarded postures of the other members, their hands resting on leather-bound notebooks or quills poised over parchment. The atmosphere was thick with secrecy, each member a guardian of something greater than themselves. The meeting began with a ritualistic air, as Lady Beatrice raised a goblet of red wine. To the quill, she intoned, and the others echoed. To the quill, Poirot joined in, his voice blending seamlessly, though his mind raced. The Order of the Quill, he deduced, was no mere literary society. It was a brotherhood, a cult dedicated to protecting Christie's legacy or controlling it. Lady Beatrice addressed the group, her words measured. Our purpose remains unchanged, to safeguard the legacy of the written word, to preserve that which must not be lost. Tonight, we discuss the safeguarding of the eternal quill, the manuscript that holds the key to a new era of storytelling. Poirot's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression one of scholarly curiosity. Forgive my interruption, madame, he said, leaning forward, but this eternal quill is truly as revolutionary as the rumors suggest. My studies in Brussels have uncovered references to a work by Dame Agatha that transcends her known era. A murmur rippled through the group, and Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. You are well informed, Professor. The Eternal Quill is no mere novel. It is a narrative so innovative, so profound, that it redefines the very structure of storytelling. Its technique of fusion of perspective, time, and truth could alter how stories are crafted for generations. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloging her words. And where is this masterpiece kept? Surely such a work deserves study, not concealment. A tense silence fell, broken only by the faint hiss of the gas lamps. One member, a wiry man with a hawkish nose, leaned forward, his voice sharp. You ask dangerous questions, Professor. The quill is protected for a reason. The world is not ready for its truths. Perhaps, Poirot countered, his tone mild but firm. But knowledge, it must breathe, gnawing. To lock it away is to deny its purpose. Lady Beatrice raised a hand, silencing the debate. The manuscript is safe, Professor, in a place known only to the Order. Its location is revealed only to those who prove their loyalty. Her eyes locked onto his, searching for a crack in his facade. Poirot met her gaze, his expression one of earnest inquiry. The meeting continued, with discussions of coded manuscripts, hidden archives, and the Order's efforts to thwart collectors, like Lord Ashby, whose obsession with the eternal quill had already led to confrontations. Poirot listened intently, piecing together fragments of information. The manuscript, he gleaned, was stored in a London vault, its access guarded by a complex mechanism known only to the Society's inner circle. Lady Beatrice spoke of a key of light, a phrase that echoed the cryptic clues in Christie's journal. As the meeting drew to a close, Lady Beatrice invited Poirot to join a smaller gathering in an adjacent room, a sign of trust or a test. He followed, his senses heightened, aware of the weight of eyes upon him. The room was smaller, its walls lined with locked cabinets, each marked with a quill symbol. A single chandelier cast a warm glow, illuminating a table where a leather case lay open, revealing a single-page fragment of the eternal quill. Poirot's breath caught as he approached, his scholar's guise momentarily forgotten. The page was handwritten, Christie's script flowing like a river of ink. Its opening lines described a narrative that shifted perspectives seamlessly, each sentence a puzzle piece in a larger mosaic. It was unlike anything Poirot had read, a story that seemed to unfold in the reader's mind as much as on the page. Magnificent, is it not? Lady Beatrice said, standing beside him. This is but a fragment, a taste of what the full manuscript holds. Mon Dieu, Poirot, murmured, his awe genuine. It is extraordinary, she smiled, but her eyes were calculating. You understand now why we protect it. There are those who would exploit its power, twist it for profit or fame. Lord Ashby, for instance, would sell it to the highest bidder. Poirot nodded, seizing the opportunity. This Lord Ashby, he is the collector I have heard of, a dangerous man, perhaps, dangerous and relentless, she replied. He has spies everywhere, even in this city. We've had to move the manuscript twice to evade him. And where is it now? Poirot asked, his tone casual, as if the question were a mere afterthought. Lady Beatrice hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice a whisper. In a vault beneath the old clockmakers' guild, in Cheapside, but you must swear never to speak of it, Professor. The order does not forgive betrayal. Poirot's heart leapt, but he bowed his head solemnly. I am a scholar, madame, not a betrayer. My only desire is to see such a work preserved. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. We shall see, Professor. Prove your loyalty, and you may yet join our inner circle. The meeting adjourned, and Poirot slipped away, his mind ablaze with the revelation. The Clockmakers' Guild, in Cheapside, a precise location at last. But as he stepped into the foggy night, he felt a prickle at the back of his neck. A figure lingered across the street, cloaked in shadow, watching him. Poirot quickened his pace, his cane tapping softly as he navigated the labyrinth and streets. Back at his modest hotel, Poirot shed his disguise, the tweed jacket and false beard replaced with his familiar silk dressing gown. He sat at a small desk, sketching a map of Cheapside from memory, marking the Clockmakers' Guild, the vault, the Key of Light, the Order's vigilance. All were obstacles, but Hercule Poirot was no stranger to overcoming the impossible. He sipped a tisane, the steam curling around his mustache as he reflected. The Order of the Quill was both protector and prison, guarding the eternal quill with a zeal that bordered on obsession. Lady Beatrice was a formidable adversary, her intellect matched only by her secrecy. Yet Poirot sensed a deeper truth. The manuscript was not merely a literary artifact, but a symbol of something greater, a legacy Christie had entrusted to those she deemed worthy. As dawn broke, Poirot prepared to enlist Captain Hastings, whose loyalty and resourcefulness would be invaluable in the next phase. The vault awaited, and with it, the culmination of his quest, but the shadow in the street lingered in his mind, a reminder that the Order and perhaps Lord Ashby was watching. Poirot smiled faintly, his little gray cells humming with purpose. The game was afoot, and he would not be outwitted.